30. I was afraid. Author's note. A longer wait than I had planned. Blame it on the rain and terrible twos. Thank you to my betas JDH41 and GJ Mega. Their help has been priceless. Also special thanks to Sehen for help regarding Norwegian culture language and to Mayak for help with showing French accents. You guys make this story much better than it would have been without you. But though I have wept and fasted, wept and prayed, though I have seen my head, grown slightly bald, brought in upon a platter, I am no prophet, and he is no great matter. I have seen the moment of my greatness flicker, and I have seen the eternal footman hold my coat and snicker, and in short I was afraid. T.S. Eliot James stepped off the ramp, the plane's engines thrumming behind him as it idled. It had worked. In the end, it had not taken as much convincing as he had thought. James had told Wilson of all he had discovered, of many of the experiments Sirius had done for them. The older man had agreed easily enough, and the formula for pub had been exchanged for a thumb drive of pictures. It was a simple enough principle, really. Wizarding wards affected the mind itself. Nearly every time, a hound trying to get a picture of a wizarding place simply walked away or remembered some other thing more important. They couldn't look directly at a warded place, and couldn't even intend to do so when they got close. But if the person didn't mean to take the picture, if perhaps their true target was something nearby, and only a corner was captured, Wilson's hounds had discovered it, accidental digital pictures of dead zones all over the world. Pictures of impassable buildings, of mythical creatures, of people dressed in odd clothing doing odder things. And with careful planning, the man had expanded the accident into purposeful pictures. He had discovered a person could walk to a certain place and face a place across from a magical zone, putting their back to it. Then, simply take a picture of themselves, their face in a far corner, the zone showing clearly. It worked because most wards did not bend light. They did not truly cloak a place, only affected the minds of those not possessing the spark of magic. James suspected there were places that did do so. Those places would be as hidden from wizards as they were from normal folk. But the pictures, the amazing, brilliant photographs, the proof was overwhelming. Oh, some would still scoff, James knew. They would say it had been tampered with, that it was photoshopped, a joke only the foolish believed. But those who were curious, who attempted to get to the places captured and found themselves, every time, turned away, they would begin to doubt. And doubt would lead to discovery. James walked, briefcase in hand, dressed in an impeccable suit as he approached the black car waiting for him outside the airport. When he slid into the leather seat, he met the eyes of his aide. Nathan didn't ask. James only smiled, wide and satisfied. I have them. Nathan nodded once and held out his hand. James opened his case and withdrew the thumb drive, its small silver surface seemingly harmless. Nathan tucked it away, eyes solemn. It was a risk, approaching him in person. James didn't falter. It was worth it. I wasn't going to send the formula over the net, and I knew that was what it would take to convince the old codger that it was time to finally move. He still doesn't want to take risks. Nathan narrowed green eyes, though his face was blank. I thought we were all supposed to share freely what we learn. James waved one hand, eyes cheerful and not the least bit bothered by the comment. And we do. It is simply that some of us have more talent in certain areas than others. Wilson is formidable with his manufacturing and shipping business, and he is also the most visible of all of us. He has no alter ego. All the heads know who he is. One of us falls, he does too. I do not blame the man for seeking to keep some insurance to himself, and what I have offered, a means of protection from wizarding spells, well, he owes me now and knows it, and he can mass-produce the stuff and use his unique situation to spread it out across the globe. We can't stay secret forever. It is time to take more risks, time to begin to mobilize. Just a little while longer, Nathan. A little longer, a few more thousand, and we will be unstoppable. Nathan looked out the window. When he spoke, his voice was soft. I can understand defending ourselves, but sometimes I think you only want to punish them. I thought this was about using their technology for our own race's benefit, their healing potions, their defensive wards. After working with the wizard, I am only more convinced how much good they could do the human race if they were free to do so. James's humor fled. He spoke, voice serious and deadly quiet in the car. And yet, I am only more convinced how much damage they can do us. For every healing spell, there are a dozen destructive ones. You have seen how easily a single wizard could devastate a group of us. Then you ask why I seek a defense from them. Nathan met his eyes, earnest and sorrowful. Please, James, I just don't want this to turn into some paramilitary extermination. This doesn't have to start a war. Oh, my friend. James reached out and laid a hand on his shoulder, shaking his head slowly in pity. He thought of his brother of James, whose name he bore in remembrance. They started the war years ago. We simply cannot let her drag Mr. Potter into this. I have no doubt that is what whomever is behind this debacle intended. Dumbledore looked sadly over at McGonagall, his voice resigned. The older witch sighed and shook her head. I still cannot believe this. She is just a child, bright, but this is Durmstrang. They do not accept muggle-borns at all, and openly teach the dark arts. Do we even know what these challenges will contain? Dumbledore slowly shook his head. They are being designed by school officials and the Norwegian ministry. All the more reason to keep Mr. Potter out of it. McGonagall's mouth turned down in a severe frown. It is wrong, Albus. We cannot simply sweep her off in the middle of the night to a strange school without even informing her parents. Dumbledore clasped his fingers together and looked at her over his glasses. There is every possibility Miss Granger would also contact Mr. Potter. We will inform her parents ourselves of the situation as soon as she is settled. We will pick 2 companions to work alongside her, and I will do my best to keep her from harm. But we cannot allow Mr. Potter to walk into this trap. It is simply not worth it. Minerva looked away, and an odd jarring note came from the corner of the office. They both turned to the sound, and Fawkes perched there, his feathers oddly ruffled. Albus wasn't sure he had ever quite heard that sound before. The phoenix shifted and looked away from them, tucking its head under one wing. Albus frowned, then turned back to his friend, trying to smile. Trust me, this is the only thing we can do for the greater good of all of Britain. Mr. Potter is too important, and it is not worth re-enrolling him at Hogwarts only to send him into Durmstrang. McGonagall did not nod, but she didn't disagree either. Instead, she slowly rose, looking far more old and frail than she had when she entered. Very well. I will send someone for the girl. Neville sat across from Hermione in the common room, looking over her notes with a frown. I'm sorry, Hermione, I just don't see it. He shook his head mournfully. Hermione leaned over beside him, shuffling through a few papers, then handing him a particular day's notes. Reread this. Professor Flitwick mentioned several times the differences between this category of charms wand movements and the more advanced categories. It's all in the wrist, really. From what I've read in a few other books, you can usually keep your forearm and elbow still while casting these, if you got the flick right. Easier to coordinate. Neville glanced over the tiny print and sighed. He swore she had written down every single word their professor had said that day. Still, he put on a smile as he looked up at her. Thanks. Hermione smiled brightly, then looked down at her own homework. No problem. You can keep them if you want, while you're finishing up your S. I've already written that one. Right now I'm focusing on the upcoming project for ancient runes. I've got some ideas. Neville saw the way the girl's hands moved restlessly over her papers, but didn't comment. He hadn't chosen ancient runes as one of his electives, and was glad of it once he saw some of Hermione's textbooks. Hermione! A timid voice brought both their gazes around. Dennis Creevey, his mouse-brown hair dangling in his eyes, shuffled a bit. I was sent by Professor McGonagall to come get you. She's in Headmaster Dumbledore's office. I mean, she was in the hallway, but then she saw me, and she told me to tell you to meet her there, as soon as possible, right now. The boy ground to a halt. Neville glanced over at Hermione, who blinked in confusion, then shrugged her shoulders and stood. All right. Thanks, Dennis. The smaller Gryffindor nodded quickly and scampered away. Hermione neatly gathered up her papers and slipped them into her bag before turning back to Neville. I guess I'll see you tomorrow. Neville nodded, though he glanced around with a frown. It's nearly curfew. Seems a bit odd for her to call you up this late. Hermione bit her lip, eyebrows drawn together in thought. I'm sure she will give me a note if she keeps me late, so I can get back without losing points. I hope this isn't about that last paper I turned in for Transfiguration. I really thought it needed those extra 3 inches, but she did specifically say the last time that I needed to cut back on my length. Quality, not quantity. Hermione mimicked their serious professor with the last 3 words, and Neville smiled. I don't think she would summon you for something like that now. Hermione only sighed, and with a wave, quickly trotted from the room. "Come in." Hermione cracked the wooden door open and slipped inside the large, cavernous office of the headmasters of Hogwarts. The room awed her, even though she had seen it a time or two before. It was simply so grand. "Take a seat, Miss Granger." Hermione turned, and then gaped again as she saw it was not just Professor McGonagall inside the large room, but Headmaster Dumbledore. Wasn't he supposed to be at Durmstrang? She glanced over as a flash of movement caught her eyes, and saw Fawkes idly stretch his wings, his feathers oddly ruffled. His black eyes met hers, and to her shock Hermione felt something, a slight tone of soothing music. She quickly looked away again and walked over to a large-backed chair, its fabric sapphire blue with golden swirls. Across from her, Professor McGonagall held a single cup of tea in her hands, the liquid trembling slightly in its saucer. Hermione tried to smile and sat up straight, though her hands twisted together on her lap. What was this about? Did I do something wrong, Professor? Hermione finally questioned, unable to bear the growing silence as both headmaster and professor looked at her. She grew even more worried when Professor McGonagall actually sighed, and to her shock pulled off her spectacles in one hand and rubbed her eyes in a weary gesture after she set the cup aside. "Miss Granger," the professor said simply, then sighed again, before replacing her glasses and fixing a gentle, yet stern, look on her face. "I must ask you a question, for form's sake, but will state this first. I do not believe you did anything wrong." Hermione nodded numbly, her worry growing by leaps and bounds. McGonagall nodded once, then clasped her hands together. "Did you request, or bribe, any student or adult to place your name into the goblet of fire?" Hermione felt her mouth drop open in incredulous shock as she looked from McGonagall to Dumbledore before the humor of it rose up. She laughed, shaking her head. So this was why the headmaster was here. Of course not. That's ridiculous. She kept shaking her head, smiling, until she saw that the professor across from her was not smiling. In fact, her shoulders had seemed to droop from their normal posture. Hermione's laugh trickled off, her breath catching in her throat. She looked towards Dumbledore, and the old wizard was merely looking at her, his blue eyes calm. Panic began to rise, but she tamped it down harshly. This was some joke. They must have intercepted something. Must have. Must have. Headmaster Dumbledore cleared his throat and spoke in a gentle voice. "Miss Granger, tonight, at the drawing of the names of those competing in the Triwizard Tournament, your own name was taken from the Goblet of Fire, under the name of another school. This represents a binding contract. Must compete, I'm sorry, but Hogwarts will do anything we can." The words the headmaster was speaking seemed to go in and out in her hearing after the words binding contract, like a movie that suddenly began skipping on her TV at home. Hermione felt the panic she had repressed rise in full force, her skin going cold, her breath stilled. No, no, no. Her mind replayed that one word over and over, horror rising in a tide over her like a smothering blanket. McGonagall stood, her eyes worried, moving toward her as Dumbledore continued to speak, but Hermione couldn't hear the words. She couldn't take it in, couldn't focus. There had to be a mistake. No, no, she didn't want to be in the tournament. What was she supposed to do? Go to Durmstrang alone? Compete alone? What about her friends? How could she do it? She could die, she could. No, please, no. No, hands grabbed her shoulders, the professor gently rubbing soothing circles, and Hermione felt tears welling in her eyes. She pushed away, jumping to her feet, and shook her head. "No, this is a mistake. This shouldn't be possible. I didn't enter my name. I don't want to compete." Beside her, Fawkes let out a sound, no longer soothing, oddly jarring like a condemnation, not towards her, but towards the headmaster who had stood as well. Dumbledore spoke, eyes full of conviction. "I don't know how it is possible. We will find out, MS Granger. The ones responsible will be punished." Hermione sucked in another breath. "But I shouldn't have to compete. This isn't my fault. They can't make me." Hermione felt her heart jump again as her head of house shook her head slowly. "I'm sorry, child. The Goblet of Fire was set up as a binder, and your own signature was on the parchment, giving your consent. It looked like a torn-off piece from the sign-up forms for dueling. I've checked my office, and your form is missing." The professor's eyes were sad but firm, her gaze steady as she spoke. As it was all laid out, Hermione only shook her head again. Hadn't those been locked up somewhere? Wasn't the professor's office warded? How could this nightmare be happening? Headmaster Dumbledore spoke up, walking around his large desk to lay a single hand on her shoulder. 3 of your housemates failed to have their names called. We can register 2 of them alongside you, give you good support to work with. You won't be alone. Hermione felt herself sway, terror jumping at her heels. Failed. Give her people the goblet didn't choose. She would be alone. It was real. It was real. But what about? Harry. Hermione closed her eyes, shouting, screaming that one word inside her head, that one lifeline, one hope. If anyone could stop this, could help her, there had to be a way. They would find a way to get out of this. Harry would make sure she wasn't alone, not Headmaster Dumbledore, not Professor McGonagall. Their tournament had gotten her in this mess. Their rules were the entire reason this was happening at all. What kind of people let unwilling students become a part of a dangerous competition? Professor McGonagall stepped up on her other side, and Hermione abruptly felt like she was surrounded, hemmed in from escape. The woman spoke, impatience in her tone, as Hermione remained mute. Miss Granger, you must calm down. I know this is a shock, but you are the top student of your year. You can handle this with our help. We need to discuss the rules of the tournament, inform your parents of your circumstances, pack your things. Hermione shook herself free of the headmaster's hand, stepping back towards the door, her only thought to flee. She had to write Harry a letter. She had to think, had to have time to come to terms with this. What would she tell her friends? What about the dueling team or academia? What would Harry say if she let them take her away to Durmstrang tonight, before she had a chance to tell him what was going on? Fawkes let out another discordant sound, and the headmaster turned to him, blue eyes firm. She has no choice in this, my friend. We will take care of her. Hermione watched as the phoenix's feathers ruffled, black eyes unreadable to her. Oh, Harry, please. Hermione thought again frantically, the helplessness rising, mixed with anger. She glanced toward the door as Professor McGonagall moved in front of it, her eyes soft now, full of sorrow. I'm sorry, Miss Granger, but the sooner we get you to Durmstrang, the better. The elves will pack your trunk. Hermione shook her head again, looking around the large, ornate room, the dozens of portraits of witches and wizards in fancy dress robes, all staring down at her. At the headmaster, who stood tall, eyes locked on her own. Behind him, Fawkes let out a soft trill, and the sound did not fill her with comfort, as it usually did, but dread. Like a warning, the bleak sound of an augury before a storm. Hermione squeezed her eyes shut in fear and anger, blocking out the sight of all the things that couldn't help her get around this one contract she hadn't ever intended to enter. She had to get out of here. She had to tell Harry. Harry. Harry stepped back inside Halamsant, with a loping stride and a grin. He had enjoyed spending time with his godfather, even when the man was a wild mixture of angry and humorous. Still, he had stayed far later than he expected to. Harry tossed off the cloak he had been wearing as he entered his room, then took off his shoes and fell back on his bed with a sigh. No, Harry sat up, brow furrowed. What was that? He glanced around, eyes darting from corner to corner. Please, Number Harry jumped to his feet. That voice. It had sounded like Hermione. Harry frowned, calling out forcibly. Ivy. The elf appeared at once, eyes wide. Is Hermione here? Harry demanded, and Ivy shook her head quickly, wringing her large hands together. No, Master Potter, I hasn't seen her at all, Harry. Harry held up his hand quickly, cutting off the matronly elf as he whirled around. Where was it coming from? What was going on? Dread. Harry hissed, but the snake was already fluttering into the room, its red tongue flicking the air as it looped around his outstretched hand. I hear it, Master, I hear her calling us. She calls us the one who explains, the mistress. She feels great fear. Harry took in the quick words. It wasn't out loud. The sound was inside his mind. Harry froze in the center of his room, fear of his own rising in his chest. What was happening to her? He had thought their link limited to physical contact, but perhaps with great emotion. Oh, Harry, please. Harry felt terror steal his breath, and he closed his eyes, focusing, concentrating on that voice, that faraway sound. He felt dread bond with him, slipping inside his body with the barest hint of pain, merging its light with his own, both of them stretching out, seeking her. The moments began to stretch, seconds passing, his thoughts whirling as he waited, hoping. Again, Hermione. Harry thought frantically towards her, hoping she could hear, hoping it wasn't too late. Just one more time, Harry. And Harry saw it, the slight whip of light like a single strand of steel tossed from a molten furnace by a blacksmith's idle blow, flickering, brief, fragile. and Harry grabbed it and flung himself through fire directly towards the source of that fear-filled cry. He burst out of the flame directly behind Hermione and took in the scene with frantic eyes even as he reached out and pulled her back into his arms, unconsciously sending out a shield to push the startled professors away. The headmaster's office. McGonagall, Headmaster Dumbledore. What? Fox let out a single piercing cry from his golden perch, the sound neither harmonious or reassuring, a clear warning. Harry didn't stay to question. The fear had been too real, and his own emotions too turbulent. He pulled Hermione closer and jerked the both of them back into flame again, only hearing a startled gasp from Hermione before the flames welled up over the both of them, sending a soft white fuzziness over both ears and eyes. Dread hissed in his mind, a low undertone of anger and protectiveness. Harry paused in that flame, knowing he held her, and felt his hands grasp her wrists, dropped his head to her shoulder, spoke through their newly discovered link. Hermione, what's going on? What's wrong? Her hands turned in his own, pulling free before she turned in his arms, burying her face against his shirt, her head shaking as her mind whispered to his own. You came. I called and you came. How? How did you hear me? Harry would have laughed if his nerves were not raw from the memory of her fear. Figures she would be more worried about that than explaining what was wrong in the first place. You were afraid. I can only assume emotion acts as an amplifier. Hermione, what's going on? Harry responded and echoed his previous question with a hint of worried impatience. She spoke back, her hands clasping him tight. I need to sit, please. Harry hesitated only a second, then let his flames drop from around them, leaving them standing in the large living room of Halamsant. Hermione took in a deep breath, her body trembling slightly, then she stepped back from him, lifting her chin. Her eyes began to harden now with the beginnings of anger. Someone, somehow. She bit off the two words, took a breath and held up a hand, then made a fist with it. Put my name in the goblet of fire. Harry only frowned at that. The what? Hermione shook her head, then fell onto the nearby sofa with a harsh groan. The goblet of fire. That stupid mighty artifact that the British ministry gave to pick contestants for that moronic death trap of a tournament. That just so happens to be a binder in a bloody contract. Her voice rose to a sharp pitch at the end, breaking on the last word. Harry barely noticed the uncharacteristic swearing, the words sinking in. Within, dread hissed again, voice deadly. Danger, danger to she who explains. Harry didn't answer the serpent. He sat beside her, his voice soft as he spoke. You mean you, in the Triwizard Tournament, that tournament? Yes, Hermione snapped, then to his horror burst into tears. Dread tightened in Harry's mind, his worried voice escalating. There is water coming from her eyes. Harry only gaped, and suddenly found himself once again with an armful of bushy-haired Gryffindor, the girl both crying and ranting against his chest. Of all the ignorant, dense, obtuse politicians, a contract, my signature, another school, all two, another angry snarl, another teary breath. Prove who has the biggest bullocks. Hermione, Harry squeaked, but the girl continued unabated, less tears now and more angry snarls. Why me? That's what I would like to know. Who would do this to me? Who gains? And she stopped. She sucked in another breath, pulled back, looked up at him with reddened eyes and blotched cheeks. Harry saw the knowledge growing there and pulled her back close, closing his own eyes as he spoke, putting the pieces together. Who indeed? Hermione was silent a moment, merely laying there, and Harry could nearly hear the gears turning in her head as she thought. Finally, she spoke, voice grave. This is about you, isn't it? Who cares about me, really? Just another muggle born. But you, they couldn't get to you. A signature, McGonagall mentioned that. How would they get yours, next to impossible? You're not at Hogwarts turning in essays, writing notes, signing forms. But your friends are, and they can get to you through your friends. Didn't pick Draco or Neville, no, they are purebloods, right? Can't risk such pure blood on. Harry shook her slightly, his own voice rough as he forced her to stop. Hermione, slow down, Myone. Hermione glanced up, her brown eyes watery as she tried to smile. Myone, Harry smiled and gently squeezed her side. You need a nickname. She chuckled a little, shaking her head. Last nickname I had was Bucky Buckteeth in primary. Harry grinned. Well, if you would prefer that. She slapped at him, then let out a long, tremulous sigh. Oh, Harry, this is such a mess. Harry let his smile fade and stared across the room as he thought. Tell me everything they said. Hermione sat up, looking down at her hands as they rested in her lap. I was in a bit of shock. I don't remember it all exactly. Headmaster Dumbledore said my name came out of the goblet under another school's name. What school? Harry questioned, but Hermione shook her head. They didn't tell me. McGonagall said the goblet was a binder, that it represents a magical contract I can't get out of. My signature, it was probably from the dueling consent forms, the ones they make each contestant sign saying they understand they may be hurt by spells and such. My form was missing. Harry cursed softly. That shouldn't be legal, taking a signature from another form, just tossing it in. How can the magic not recognize the intent of the person? Hermione only sighed. I don't know enough about contracts to say. It must be the goblet in particular. It's something new the Ministry developed. Maybe it can't tell intent, maybe it doesn't care. Harry growled, anger swirling in his stomach. Then it's useless. How can they use something like that? Something untested? Hermione shook her head helplessly. It was supposed to be guarded under control. I'm sure they didn't mean. Harry interrupted her with a burst of anger. You defend them. Hermione ran a hand through her messy hair. Her own eyes narrowed back at him as she burst out in defense. No, I don't, Harry. I know it's ridiculous. I know, she wilted after the last shout, and Harry shook his head. I'm sorry, Hermione. I didn't mean to snap at you. She looked back up at him, shook her head gently. I can't get out of it, can I? Harry pulled her back into a hug, thinking frantically. Dread kept up a low hiss inside his mind, like a constant angry buzzing. I don't, unless this was a plan by the headmaster, which I doubt. I don't think Dumbledore would tell you there was no way out unless he truly believes it is so. Did he say anything else? Hermione frowned, dismay covering her features. Only that 3 of the ones from Gryffindor didn't make it into the tournament, that I could choose 2 to register with me. Teams of 3, remember. Harry narrowed his eyes. I see. Register how? Hermione only shook her head. I don't know. Harry straightened. Then he lifted his head and slowly stood, leaving Hermione sitting on the couch. He looked down at her, green eyes stern. I'm going to talk to him. Hermione began to speak, but Harry continued. I want you to stay here. I'll let you know everything he says. If there is a way out of this, I'll find it. If not, I'm not going to let 2 Gryffindors be your only help in that blasted tournament. Hermione pursed her lips in disapproval. I'm going with you. Harry stiffened. Myoni. Hermione stood resolutely, then grabbed his forearm in a firm hand. Let's go. They can no more stop me from leaving in the future than they can stop you from taking me 10 minutes ago. You don't have to treat me like delicate china. Harry began to argue, then thought better of it when he saw the fire in her eyes. Dread seemed satisfied that the witch would stay in their sight, his angry mumbling fading in his mind. Harry sighed, then grinned slightly. Fine, Bucky. Hermione sniffed, but her chocolate eyes held a glimmer of laughter. Minerva looked to the Phoenix first. She had worked under Albus Dumbledore for countless years, his Phoenix familiar at his side since she was only a student. She knew those flames, the orange-white explosion of internal fire. But Fawkes remained on his perch, as he had the entire confrontation, black eyes solemn, feathers ruffled. Albus had turned to the Phoenix as well. His face was pale, blue eyes narrowed. How? What did you do with him? How is it possible for the boy to use your flame? Fawkes remained silent, not even a soft tune from its orange beak. Minerva stepped back from the irate headmaster, her mind racing. Is it possible the boy has his own phoenix, that he bonded to one while in Egypt? It would explain how he is able to travel so easily without us knowing. Albus glanced towards her as she spoke, then stepped closer to his phoenix. Has he, my friend? Please, we must go to him and Miss Granger. Take me to them. To Minerva's shock, the scarlet bird turned its head away, the long feathered crest on its neck lowered against its skull. Albus threw his frail hands into the air with a shout. This is not a game. They are in grave danger. We must speak to them. Minerva stepped closer, afraid to touch the wizard as he began to lose the calm she always associated with him. Albus, please. There may be some other reason he cannot help us. You've spoken before of the boy's strong wards. The headmaster turned his face away, staring deeply at the regal bird that perched in stony silence. Wards mean little to him, and a phoenix must be touching a person to use its flame that I have seen. I saw no other phoenix with Mr. Potter. Fawkes is part of this. I suspected such for a long time, but he has not confided in me. Albus reached out a hand to the phoenix, his voice pleading. I have to help him. He cannot be allowed to keep Miss Granger away from this tournament, nor follow her there. It is a trap. If you care for the boy, help me prevent him from doing something rash. Minerva's spirits lifted as the phoenix turned towards them again. Then it sang, a soft, mournful tune, and Albus closed his eyes, his shoulders drooping in their flamboyant blue robes. Minerva sank into the chair behind her, knees weak. Her student was missing. Miss Granger had somehow contacted Mr. Potter about her situation without them being aware. Mr. Potter could somehow utilize Phoenix Flame. Miss Granger was being forced into a tournament, and she herself was doing part of the forcing. Mr. Potter had taken her away. Maybe he could help her. The traitorous thought infiltrated her brain. Maybe Harry Potter could do what Albus Dumbledore could not, would not. It was not something she would have thought a year ago. Wasn't something she would have thought even the day before. But she was beginning to doubt, beginning to fear that Albus was not the wizard he once was. Or perhaps she had never truly seen him clearly to begin with. The defeater of Dark Lord Grindelwald. The humble, calm wizard of unimaginable power. He always knew best, always knew how to fix a problem. She hadn't always agreed with his methods. She detested manipulation. But how could she argue with the wonderful results the man obtained? All the good he had done. And yet, he was putting one child's well-being above another when they should all be equally precious. They were children, students whose health and happiness were their responsibility. Surely they could have been more gentle with her. Surely there was some way to work within the tournament contract's rules so that she was not in so much danger. Why hadn't the headmaster suggested such a thing? Was he so consumed with what he thought must be done that he would sacrifice one child for another without hesitation? And yet he had had a phoenix on his shoulder. One of the rarest magical creatures in the world had chosen him as a companion, a being of purest light, that eschewed evil. How could she not trust a man that the light so esteemed? How could she not follow his lead? Except, now, even the phoenix would not help, and Minerva feared she had made a ghastly mistake this night. She had to trust that Albus knew what he was doing. She had to stay firm. He would make it all right again. He always did. Harry looked at Fawkes first when he appeared in the headmaster office. The phoenix was sitting stiffly, his feathers stiff along his back, wings tight against his body, while his long plumed tail curled down close to the golden perch he sat on. Beside the phoenix, Headmaster Dumbledore turned, blue eyes snapping with annoyance, and spotted them. Mr. Potter, Miss Granger. The headmaster stopped, and Harry realized the older wizard was actually at a loss for words. Professor McGonagall, however, was not. Mr. Potter, you cannot remove a student of this school without permission from her parents. You will not do so again. Harry folded his arms. What about parental consent for a minor to compete in the Triwizard Tournament? Shouldn't that be required as well? The professor narrowed her eyes at him, her thin lips pressed tightly together. Headmaster Dumbledore finally found his voice. I would greatly appreciate if you refrain from using your unique form of teleportation on school grounds. As we were discussing with Ms. Granger, her participation in the tournament was unintended and unfortunate. However, it is a matter solely between Ms. Granger, her parents, and myself. Harry knew a dismissal when he heard one. Instead, he pressed harder. What school did they put her under? Is it even a real school? He hoped it was. He really hoped it was. The headmaster turned and strode towards his desk, lifting a single piece of parchment and passing it to Hermione, who looked down at it in confusion as she read. The Academy. Harry felt recognition echo in his mind, even as the headmaster confirmed it. A premier school of magic in North America, the United States to be exact. Harry nodded his head slowly. He had heard of the school and knew at least 2 graduates from there. Perhaps, maybe he could. Harry reached out, laying a gentle hand on Hermione's shoulder in a sideways hug, whispering in her mind, withdraw from Hogwarts. Hermione glanced up at him, eyes wide. Harry continued, silently, teeth gritted. I know of that school, know 2 men who went there. This is a binding contract. That means it accepts you registered under that school's name. We can go there, talk to their headmaster. Perhaps American wizards can help us with this, unless you want Dumbledore in control. Her eyes widened. In front of them, Headmaster Dumbledore was still speaking. H. Jalmar Gildenpalm, the man in charge of coordinating the challenges for the tournament, has been to visit the school already using the Norwegian Ministry's international flu. They declined involvement in this matter. The school is not important, Ms. Granger. Hogwarts has already gained permission to assign 2 of its students to your team. Beauxbatons and Durmstrang were not happy about it. but agreed there was little choice in the matter. Hermione's eyes flickered across to the headmaster, then back to him. Against his mind, her voice was soft and conveyed a feeling of fear. They declined to help me. You think you can change their mind? Harry didn't hesitate, but nodded once firmly as he sent across their link a feeling of determination and certainty. Yes. Hermione took a breath, then reached across and clasped his hand in hers, tightly, even as she stepped away and faced her professor and headmaster. Her back was ramrod straight, her eyes a mix of anger and pride. Headmaster Dumbledore, with the knowledge that it is the lack of security measures here at Hogwarts that started this entire fiasco, and after everything that has happened to me the last 2 years, I officially withdraw my enrollment from Hogwarts School of Witchcraft and Wizardry. Harry saw the shock ripple across the witch and wizard in front of them. Headmaster Dumbledore sat back in his chair, and for the second time that night seemed speechless. Professor McGonagall was less affected. Her own eyes flared in anger, even as she stiffened in offense. Miss Granger, do not be rash. You're required by law to attend a school of magic. Hogwarts has provided for half of your school tuition, as they do for most muggle-borns. Harry glanced at Hermione, surprised at that. She didn't react. McGonagall continued, voice chiding. You will not find the other schools so lenient. Hermione sucked in a breath, outraged, coloring her voice. I don't need your scholarships. How dare you threaten me? Professor McGonagall looked surprised at the accusation. Headmaster Dumbledore found his voice, reaching a soothing hand towards the professor as he spoke. Ms. Granger, we are not threatening you. The professor was merely stating a fact. There are no other schools in Britain, and tuition abroad is steep. Knowing your parents. Hermione flushed now as she interrupted the old wizard. You don't know anything. I'm done. Done. She turned to Harry, stepped closer with intent. The headmaster stood, his voice pleading now. Miss Granger, please, you need us. You must participate in this tournament, the first competition of which is at the end of November. You do not even know where to go. Harry spoke now and readied himself to leave. She will compete. Don't worry about that, headmaster. This is no longer your problem. The headmaster let out a sound, some wordless tone of denial. To Harry's shock, he felt magic gathering around the old wizard, a deep well of power opening up as if to swallow them whole. He was going to try to stop them from leaving. Harry braced himself, fury wearing with surprise, if this is what it took. Then, suddenly, Fawkes sang, a high melody of fire and anger and insulted rage, the phoenix launching itself into the air, diving down towards them as he spoke in power and light. Free will, friend of fire, free choice, the headmaster cried out again, some word Harry could not catch, and then Harry was swallowed in phoenix fire not his own. Fawkes' fire somehow softer, warmer against his skin, the song surrounding them the only sound they could hear. He felt Hermione's hand, still in his own, and squeezed it tightly. Fawkes had taken them back to Halamsant. The phoenix must have known where they were the whole time, and refused the headmaster's request to take him to them earlier. Harry released Hermione's hand and turned to the phoenix, the large scarlet bird perched on the large mantel over the fireplace. Fawkes, Harry asked softly, but the phoenix turned away, tucking its plumed head under one ruby-red wing. Harry frowned at him, then turned back to Hermione, who stood looking lost in the middle of the room. Inside, dread hissed in displeasure. Let me out, speaker. Let me say words to our nestmate. Harry didn't bother arguing. He sighed and let the serpent slowly uncoil from his core, the Quetzalcoatl spreading its wings and becoming solid as it separated from him. Dread immediately slithered through the air over to Hermione in a silent flutter of scarlet wings. He curled about her shoulders, his feathered scales sliding softly over her clothes before his head hovered before her confused eyes. Slow your heart, nestmate. I will protect you with fang and steel. You are my giver of words. Hermione smiled slightly, though oddly enough more tears seemed to rise in her eyes. She reached out one hand to press it gently along the feathered snake's side. Thanks, she sniffed, then she smiled. The word is relax, means to calm down. Dread paused a moment, the snake's head tilting to the side in a parody of human expression. Then he spoke with a questioning air. Relax, calm, why down? Hermione blinked, then glanced at Harry. He simply shrugged. No idea, just a phrase, I guess. Hermione laughed, then glanced around again before turning back to Harry. I guess we need to send Darby for my stuff. Send a letter to Neville, too, if you can let me borrow some parchment and a quill. And, well, we better go to my parents. Harry paled. Now, he questioned lightly. One side of Hermione's lip lifted in what was nearly a smirk. Better to get to them before Dumbledore does. Got to tell them some of what's going on. They won't be happy. Harry groaned. Hermione penned a quick letter, sending it off with Darby after some brief instructions regarding her things. Then Harry pulled her into a quick embrace and took them both to her house, the Muggle street dark in the night. Hermione grimaced beside him. It's got to be past midnight. Forgot how late it was. They're going to be angry with me. Harry glanced over at that, her face lit dimly in the light of a single street lamp in front of the two-story house. Why, none of this is your fault. Hermione only frowned. Mom is cranky when she's woken up in the middle of the night. Harry shook his head, then followed her to the front door. Hermione hesitated a moment, then with a shiver pushed her ornate round button beside the frame. A loud gong sounded inside, followed by a cheerful musical tune. Almost immediately, a light flickered on inside, followed by more lights. Hermione groaned and shifted from foot to foot. Then there was the sound of footsteps quickly stomping towards them. There was a pause. Then Harry heard a latch being undone, and the door was quickly pulled open, Mr. Granger's worried face pale. Hermione, what's wrong? Something happened at your school. Hermione opened her mouth, then to Harry's extreme discomfort began to tear up again. Oh, Daddy, she said, and jumped into the larger man's arms. Harry shifted and resisted the desire to step back when the man turned accusing brown eyes to him. Harry quickly spoke when he saw that his friend wasn't inclined to, before the irate father thought he was somehow at fault. Hermione was, that is, there is this competition going on, and she was accidentally entered into it, and Harry tried to think of a good way to put it, while feeling increasingly uncomfortable standing on the front porch in the middle of the night. Well, she was entered under another school, so had to go to the school where the competition is and compete under that school's name. And Harry stopped again, wondering if he should even say anything about how dangerous the competition might be, or that they hadn't even found a way to convince the other school to help instead of Hogwarts. Not to mention the incidental fact that Hermione was no longer enrolled at Hogwarts. To his relief, Hermione pulled back a bit, and with another sniff spoke. Harry took me home. I withdrew from Hogwarts, Daddy. This is all their fault, and the older man softly shushed his daughter, then stepped back, gesturing Harry inside as he spoke. Don't worry about it, darling. I haven't liked the sound of this school since your first year there. Far too many dangerous things going on. Trolls, for God's sake. I'm sure we can find another school, or perhaps there is a self-study program available. Meanwhile, tell me more about this competition. Sweetheart. A voice called, and Harry turned to see Mrs. Granger descending the steps, tying a large, fluffy robe around her as she glanced with bleary eyes into the entryway. Hermione sucked in a breath, then abandoned her father for her mother's arms. Harry shared a look with Mr. Granger as the tears began anew. The older man sighed. I'll go put on some tea. It took a good hour to get the entire situation laid out for Hermione's parents. Harry sat beside her, and occasionally she would silently tell him, via a quick touch to his hand or a nudge on his shoulder, to avoid or soften a particular topic. Hermione didn't want them to know just how dangerous the tournament was, though she did tell them there was risk involved. She also didn't want them to know that Hermione, at this point, had no one else on her team, and that they weren't even sure if the other school would agree to be involved. Instead, she simply told them that herself and Harry would be going there in the morning to, in her words, iron out the details. Harry hoped he would be able to, for he wouldn't want to explain anything else to her parents if it was his own fault. They were considerably unhappy with the situation as it was. Finally, when Hermione yawned one too many times, Mrs. Granger set down her tea and gathered her daughter up. I think it's far past time for bed. Yes. Without waiting for a response, she began to tug the bushy-haired girl towards the stairs. Hermione glanced back at Harry apologetically. What time in the morning? Harry stood awkwardly and did some quick mental calculations. Let's meet after lunch. With the time difference, should put us getting there at the start of the school day. Hermione nodded, and the two women disappeared up the steps. Harry glanced to the side, saw Mr. Granger's eyes narrowed on him, and fidgeted as he spoke. I'll just come back tomorrow, then. Harry began to turn and reluctantly stopped when the other man spoke. So, I wasn't born yesterday. I know you two aren't telling us everything. Harry shifted on his feet, then for the lack of anything better to do with his hands, put them in his trouser pockets. "Sir, I'm sorry if—" Mr. Granger continued, interrupting him mid-apology. "Don't bother, lad. You just promise me you'll take care of my daughter." Harry straightened and met the muggle's eyes, their color so like Hermione's own. "I can promise that, sir." The man nodded once firmly, then escorted him to the door before speaking again. "Come at noon, eat lunch with us. I know my wife would have invited you if she wasn't so distracted." Harry thought about turning the invitation down and decided that wouldn't go over well. He nodded tentatively. "Thank you, sir." The man raised an eyebrow, then gestured toward the door. "Feels odd letting a teenager just vanish into the night so late. You sure you don't need a ride someplace? Does your kind have public transportation that's safe?" Harry blinked, then smiled. "Thank you, but I'm all right. Wizards have a bus system, but I've never used it." Harry thought, then decided to go with simple. "Teleport." Mr. Granger nodded to himself. "Of course. Should have figured as much, with you taking Hermione home to us and all. Still, odd thing to think of, even with knowing our girl is a witch these last 4 years. Still haven't gotten a handle on it." Harry nodded politely, and Hermione's father waved him away with a last farewell. Harry called up his flame and went straight to his bedroom, looking around with bleary eyes as he sat on the bed. Fawkes was perched on his desk, a soft, glowing light in the dark room. Harry spoke softly, his voice seeming loud in the quiet. "Will you return to Dumbledore?" The phoenix did not reply, merely looked him over once and turned away. Harry sighed and lay back on top of the bedspread, not bothering to remove his clothes. Dread flew over, alighting on his chest. "You have returned her to her nest," Harry hummed in acknowledgement to the Quetzalcoatl. After a moment, the snake spoke again, curling in a tight ball, wings spreading to cover his cold body. "I do not like this tournament. I do not like her in the company of strange ones in a foreign nest." "Me either." Harry hissed softly back, then lifted a hand to lay it against the serpent's feathered side. For a long moment he lay there, tired but unable to sleep, turning over his various options in his mind, rearranging plans and considering the fallout of any decision he made. Then Fawkes began a soft song, the dull light he cast off pulsing with each note, of peace and comfort, of fate and freedom, and Harry finally drifted off to sleep. Stephen K. Wilson Roman IV owned an empire. It wasn't a boast. It wasn't useless embellishment. It was the truth, and he knew it not because of the billions he earned, but by the time spent building and managing it. SKW Incorporated had started as something humble, a small warehouse owned by Wilson SR, who had a few cousins who owned restaurants and needed timely deliveries. Wilson Jr. had turned one warehouse into 3, and Stephen's father had added the first true fleet of trucks. But Stephen himself had brought the business into the new century, expanding to air deliveries and refrigerated trucks, first a statewide business, then cross-country corporation, then finally a global empire. And the money rolled in, raising him from the middle class to the high and grand, when even attending the simple funeral of a friend turned into a security expedition. He traveled escorted. He never drove in the same vehicle as his nephews, his current heirs. He knew computers well for a man of his years, entering his 5th decade. He had a fleet of lawyers as well as security, and he never tired of keeping his finger on the pulse of the economy. And Stephen had discovered the wizarding world the way any mathematician would find the mysterious X from a complicated formula. It had always been there, if one knew enough of equation to find it. One only had to separate it to one side and do the arithmetic, and everything would fall into place. It was natural, then, to be a part of something like the Hounds. Stephen himself wasn't quite sure who had started the acronym. He often entertained himself by imagining what it meant. Hilariously outsourced unified and normally diligent sympathizers. The thought made him laugh, and Stephen easily was able to afford to fund such a hobby. He knew himself to be one of the main backers of the endeavor and ruthlessly took advantage of that fact by giving money and getting information. Oh, he knew the other hound groups didn't always share. They may claim to be open and out for the good of humanity, but Stephen knew how the world really worked. Knowledge was power, and money could buy both. Of course, Wilson knew that the knowledge he held also made him a liability to his cause. If the wizards ever caught him, they could take from his mind enough to destroy their movement before it ever got off the ground. Wilson stood to gain too much from exposing the wizarding world to ever let the opportunity pass, and he was an expert at economics. He had to know what he did to have himself in the right place to take advantage of all that would come to light, which meant protection from the wizards as well as himself. So his security force was nearly as large as his delivery one. They patrolled the warehouses of his wizarding artifacts. They kept watch over his house, his business offices. Two traveled with him at all times, all armed, of course, outside of those states prohibiting concealed carry weapons. At least, they were careful to let the authorities think so. Wilson had had several run-ins with the American government over his subterfuge activities. The FBI didn't look kindly on secrecy, nor on the amount of firepower Wilson could command. That he often hired ex-military and mercenaries didn't help his reputation. He had been targeted for drug raids several times and often had parts of his fleet monitored. But Wilson was clean from that sort of contraband. What he hid and transported was far more valuable than illegal substances. But it would be far more horrible for Wilson's magical findings to be discovered than it would any drugs. So Stephen was doubly careful, having hiding places for his secret compartments, layers upon layers of security, none of his employees ever quite knowing everything of anything. Only Wilson himself could command, and he never involved his nephews in the paranormal side of his business. Stephen Wilson liked to think that of all the hound groups in the world, his was both the largest and most militarized. His were the ones who could profit most from London's discoveries, and his were the ones who could truly put them in action. Giving up his photos was only a small price to pay, and the knowledge that Phase Roman II was entering its last stages also useful. Wilson hadn't needed to do much recruitment himself, but by his best estimates, their numbers had tripled. With the photos, that number would again double. Soon, the wizards would notice. It was only a matter of time and coincidence, which was why Stephen was now sliding from his black car in Chapel Hill, North Carolina, to personally visit what was perhaps his only true friend. "The grounds are clear, sir. She is alone in her office." Stephen turned, giving a tip of his chin to the large man who stood beside him. Falcon, so called because of the large tattoo on his right arm, was his chief of security and also his personal bodyguard when he had to travel. "Thank you." Stephen entered the building, hearing the footsteps behind him as well as Falcon's growled words into his headpiece to the others on the security team. They would be spreading out, on the lookout for anything suspicious. Rarely was Stephen Wilson caught unprepared. Ahead of him ranged some of the outlying office buildings of the prestigious Duke University Hospital, one of the leading places in the country for medical care. Falcon stepped ahead of him, opening the door and stepping back as he passed. Stephen barely acknowledged him, a small nervous twinge beginning to grow in his stomach. He knew she would be pissed at him. She always was, when he came in person. And when Stephen stepped through the door of Dr. Margaret Madigan, she looked up and scowled. "Stephen Wilson," she hissed, standing. "I cannot believe you, idiot." The door was closed behind them by an amused Falcon, and Wilson found himself alone in the office of a middle-aged woman with evil in her eyes. Stephen held up his hands. "Margie, honey, please, this is important, and I didn't want to tell you through chat." The woman sniffed and narrowed her dark green eyes at him. "Do not call me honey, and I don't care if it's important. You know how risky this is." Stephen waited a beat, then sat down in a chair, looking up at the consternated woman. Her brown hair, pleated down her back in a single braid, was beginning to go white at the roots. Not the grey fading of some women, but a pure, beautiful white. Stephen was at once even more enamored, and spent a moment mourning the fact that he couldn't come up with excuses more often to meet in person. Then he sighed. "I'm sorry, but you have to know what has come out of London. They are working with a wizard." Margaret sucked in a breath. Stephen tried to keep his own. Being near her was like a drug, addictive and overwhelming. He continued, eyes roving over her, seeking out more changes he might have missed in the last year. "They've been making breakthroughs left and right. I've gained a lot of the information, but the best is that they have found a substance that seems to null some of the electromagnetic pulses utilized by these wizards. Lead. Lead." Margaret breathed and moved a chair over beside him, plopping down into it with the same boneless grace she had had as a youth. They had met in college. Wilson, the pampered business student, she the hardworking scholarship med intern. It had been love at first sight, for Stephen at least. Margaret had always been too busy for anything more than friendship, and then so had he. Of course. She continued, mumbling under her breath. Just like a Faraday cage can stop electromagnetic pulses from frying computer equipment, it should have been obvious. But he always had time now for regret. Stephen smiled at her, then reached in his pocket and withdrew a small thumb drive and passed it over. That contains the formula. I know you will want to look it over. You are far more a scientist than I, even though you normally work with medicine and not metals. However, it also has all of my gathered digital proof of the existence of magicals. London will be dispersing it themselves to the other hound groups, who will also pass it on and so forth. You will get a slight jump on them. Margaret's lips twisted slightly in amusement. Steve, you know it's just me and Lisa here. I don't do recruitment, and I don't see the point of it either. What I want are the secrets behind their potions, the chemicals they use, the plants. Get me a magical plant sample, and I may just marry you. His heart leapt. He immediately contained himself. His doctor had warned him that a man in his 50s needed to begin the process of going easy on his heart. But he would be damned if he didn't find a sample and deliver it personally to her as well, if it fucking killed him. Stephen grinned and reached out, nudging her niece slightly with a finger. Look into that formula. It's a concentrated version of lead that can be utilized in fabric. We will be making some armor, honey, and I'm giving both you and your secretary the first 2 pieces. The woman rolled her expressive green eyes and laughed. You are an absolute kook if you think either of us will be wearing some sort of padded vests or something. We are not going to be attacked in our labs, Steve. Neither of us even deal with the computer aspect of things. We simply dig through the data we have on their medical advancements and try to figure them out. Anything from London on that, something actually useful to humanity. Stephen tapped his fingers on one knee as he responded. You will have to contact them yourselves on that avenue. The head of that group is a bit of an odd one himself, and would wonder about why I was interested more in their healing spells than their weapons. Her face twisted into a frown, and her voice lowered. Please tell me you are not acting as if this is some vigilante thing. I don't want to even think of any of us trying to actually fight them. Why would we? Just expose them, discover things that could benefit us. We don't need their weapons. Stephen didn't bother to argue with her naivety. It was one of the things he liked about her, that she did not realize how dark the world truly was. That everyone didn't always have a good reason, a pure one, for discovering another race. That it was more the weapons than the potions that had made their cause so large. It was fear, not hope, that drove the hounds to hunt. Instead, he patted her knee and rose. Do not worry, Margie. Now my 10 minutes is up. I won't keep you. Oh, she said, rising to her own feet and suddenly looking a little lost. All right. Stephen waited, hoping for more, hoping that perhaps this time she might ask him to stay. But she only stood, looking on edge, and there was a knock at the door. Dr. Madigan. A familiar female voice questioned. Stephen smiled at Margaret, then drew her into a reluctant hug, though her body was stiff in his arms. He kissed her lightly on her cheek, a brief touch of his lips to her skin, afraid to linger longer. Then he turned and left, giving a small smile and greeting to Lisa before following Falcon back towards their waiting car. He hadn't warned her after all. Why hadn't he? She needed to be prepared. She needed to know that things were not going to go easy, that it would all be so messy that people were going to get hurt. That things could happen to him, probably would. But as he had sat there, he hadn't been able to do it. Hadn't been able to take the light from her eyes, hadn't been able to tarnish the amazingness of magic with its darker purpose. Hadn't been able to tell her that he himself was researching ways to defend against what he saw as an inevitable magical assault. Falcon. Wilson barked as he slid into the car. The larger man turned, his bald head shining slightly in the lamplight. Set up a team to keep her under surveillance. When things heat up, I don't want her to be defenseless. If they find her somehow, some way, make sure they can get her out of here. Pick one of my safe houses, don't tell me which one. If worst comes to worst and I'm captured, they will not get her whereabouts from me. Sir, Falco said, and turned to face forward. Stephen sat alone in the back seat as he was driven away through the dark night, his thoughts turning inward. Within a year, most likely, maybe even 6 months, he would need to rush manufacturing on his new armor and equip the majority of his security personnel. He already had training regimens in place for techniques in fighting hostiles. It was time to step those up as well. Just over half a year, and the wizarding world could suddenly be brought into the light, one way or another. And the sparks that flew from that encounter might be enough to set the world ablaze. Margaret, what did he say? Lisa was eager, nearly bouncing after Stephen had left. Margaret herself, much more down-to-earth side. They are going to start distributing those photos of his for more proof. I imagine that will fire them up, having something to actually see. Lisa rolled her blue eyes. That can't be it. Come on, Spill. You haven't seen him in a year. Margaret looked down, fiddling absently with a cheap pen on her desk. Well, he did say they've made some advancements in blocking magical residues and certain outright spells. A lead compound of sorts that they've altered to thread in clothing, like armor. He gave me the formula. I was thinking of looking at it myself in the lab. Might be useful when... Ma! Lisa burst out, exasperated. Please tell me that wasn't all. Did he kiss you? Margaret began to flush and sat up primly. I am much too old for that kind of question. Her secretary and closest friend chuckled, bouncing in her chair. Quit acting like you are a dinosaur. You are gorgeous and lonely, and you talk to that man every week on the internet for at least an hour, and I know for a fact that you text him while you are at work sometimes. I do not, Margaret barked and sniffed, and it was only a kiss on the cheek, just like the last time. Lisa sighed. Old people romance. I swear, if you moved any slower at things, the both of you might actually hold hands before I'm your age. Margaret gave a small sigh, sadness beginning to darken her eyes. Lisa, you know it's not that simple. We're two very different people, and with what is going on, we decided it wasn't safe. At least, I think we did. Lisa snorted and tapped a manicured nail on her cheek. How you two can talk about relationships and yet not talk about them at the same time mystifies me. He came down here to visit you to tell you stuff he could have easily told you online. He said it was risky to do that. Margaret said half-heartedly, but Lisa spoke right over her soft denial. And all you probably did was sit there, just like last time, staring at him. Right. I mean, he is handsome, in a silver fox kind of way, but you've got to actually speak to him outside of written text. It's obvious to me that he's crushing on you. It's time to buck up and take charge. Become the feminist movement. Next time he visits, walk right up to the man and kiss him on the mouth. Lisa clarified. Margaret flushed again, then waved the woman away. Go away before I die of embarrassment. Lisa sniffed, then rose to her feet. Fine, suit yourself. Just don't stay here too long. It's late, all right. Margaret smiled wanly and watched the chipper young woman gather her things and leave. It wasn't as simple as Lisa made it sound. Stephen Wilson was a wealthy businessman. The gifts he sent her on her birthday, on holidays, whenever it struck the mood. She absently rose a finger to the necklace around her neck. All the gifts were expensive. Margaret herself was no slouch, making a very respectable salary as a researcher at the university, but it still made her feel strange to have a man like him. Well, courting her. She wasn't an idiot. She knew he was interested, and had been since they had met long ago. But it had never been the right time. Even now, when their respective careers should have been settling down, this issue with the hounds made things even more difficult. Stephen was her oldest and dearest friend, before anything else. He had shared with her his growing suspicions of the wizarding world, and he had shown her some of the first books he had discovered on spells that could heal ills that normal society struggled with daily. She had been fascinated. Together, they had pored over tomes, gone through warehouses, laughed and made plans. At one glorious moment, they had had something more, and then a portion of Wilson's security had shown up to work completely clueless, and an entire warehouse had been wiped clean. Pure luck, perhaps, had saved them all from losing their memories. Stephen had changed, becoming more introverted, more paranoid. And he had left her in Chapel Hill to return to his business quarters in New York, a world away as far as she was concerned. For her own protection, he had said. Sometimes, Margaret wished they had all forgotten about the wizards. Perhaps then she could find her own personal happiness. But it simply wasn't meant to be. Hadn't she learned that already? The world was always throwing things in her way. But perhaps she could make that up if she could only get her hands on some samples. She had a lab, had all the equipment she could possibly need at her hand. With one sample, she could research the molecules and properties of these magical plants that gave them the ability to heal. If she had a potion, even better. Perhaps the effects could be duplicated. Margaret smiled, imagining being the one to discover the cure for cancer or even some other currently incurable disease like psoriasis that her own father had suffered from half his life, to take away pain and suffering. Let Stephen worry about his economics and his defenses. Margaret Madigan was a doctor, a scientist. She would find a way to make people know that what these wizards offered was a promise for so much more than they had, freedom from pain and sickness. She refused to let people only see the darkness when all she saw was the light. Lunch was an odd affair. Mr. Granger was gone, working a shift at the dentistry the couple owned. Mrs. Granger bustled about as if nothing was odd about having her daughter home from school after dropping out, along with a friend, while soon to be made to compete in a tournament. She had made them both a large meal and insisted Harry eat more until he finally turned down a third serving with firm insistence. Hermione smiled at him across the table, and her foot brushed his own. "Thank you." Harry smiled back at her, shrugged. Her own smile grew in response. Mrs. Granger spoke from where she sat between them, her hazel eyes both calculating and full of humor. "Sometimes I think you two are talking in some language I can't hear." Harry flinched, eyes widening, but Hermione only scoffed. "Honestly, Mother, we're just good friends." Mrs. Granger poured herself another glass of homemade lemonade and raised a single eyebrow at her daughter. "I never said you weren't good friends. But I thought Harry here didn't go to Hogwarts any longer, and yet you two seem very close." Hermione frowned and spoke before Harry could. "Well, we owl." Mrs. Granger smiled benevolently. "Of course." Hermione narrowed her own eyes at her mother, and it was Harry's turn to feel like he was the one left out of a private conversation. "I'm serious, Mum, and we spent a lot of the summer together, working on school projects." Mrs. Granger nodded, then turned to Harry with innocent eyes. "It was so nice of you to help Hermione with her schoolwork. She said you own some land in the country, as well as a house in town." Hermione flushed, her fingers tightening on her utensils. Harry answered, glancing between the girl and her mother. "Yes, I inherited several properties from my parents." "Really?" The woman's voice was intrigued, and she leaned over slightly. "You have more than a house." "Mum," Hermione spat, but Mrs. Granger never glanced away from him. Feeling caught, Harry cautiously replied, "The Potter estate has several places, though I've only visited the one here in London, then Australia and Egypt." "Australia?" Mrs. Granger gasped in delight. "How wonderful! Has Hermione told you that we simply love to travel? I must say, Sydney has always been a dream of mine. We usually go across the Channel to France on vacation, but I've been hinting about a trip to the famous Outback." Hermione hissed from across the table. "Leave him alone. He's not going to invite you over for tea at one of his estates." Harry blinked. Was that what the woman wanted? Mrs. Granger laughed in delight. "Oh, darling, don't be so prickly. I'm simply getting to know your young man better." Hermione seemed to lose her voice, her mouth opening and closing silently. Then she spluttered. "He is not my young man. He's my best friend," Mrs. Granger answered quickly, voice warm as she waved a single elegant hand. "Oh, dear, you know what I meant. You are much too young for that other sort of thing." Harry looked between the two of them at a loss. Hermione wouldn't look at him now, but stared down at her empty plate as if it could tell her secrets. Harry decided it was time to get out of there. He stood, cleared his throat, and turned to Hermione's mother. "Thank you for lunch. It was very good. Hermione and I probably ought to get going." "Oh, of course, dears." The woman moved about in a flutter of activity, smiling beatifically as she ushered them away from the table. "I'll just clean up. You two have fun." When they were alone in the living room, Harry glanced down at Hermione's bent head, his friend's eyes locked purposefully on the carpet for some reason. "Well, I guess that's that. You need anything before we go?" Hermione shook her head, took a deep breath, then looked up and met his eyes with an odd smile. "No. Let's get out of here before she invites you to dinner." Harry had done some quick research that morning, mainly consisting of sending Darby with a letter to Remus, who had asked Morris about the academy and sent a reply back to Harry via his house elf. Remus had said enough in his quick letter for Harry to know that the American wizarding school was not organized like the British wizarding schools. There were apparently two different tiers of schools within North America. The elementary magical schools, which taught basic practical information to students from ages 8 to 14 without access to more than what was called a trainer wand, and the high magical school, where students at age 15 would be fitted for a unique wand of their own and progress to learning more advanced forms of magic until age 18, when they were expected to graduate. Of course, there were exceptions. Very advanced students, or those possessing a great deal of power and wealth like Zachary Griffin, had entered the academy, the foremost high magical school in North America, when he should have been entering an elementary program. Competition could be stiff for the magical high schools across North America, with students having to qualify via a series of tests similar to the OWL in order to gain admittance, which caused Harry a measure of concern. He had no test exams to give, no proof of his own skill. He had to hope his reputation could speak for itself to the institution. Harry and Hermione appeared at the gate of the academy, a large stone structure just as Remus had painstakingly described in his letter. It was located in the eastern portion of Washington, D.C. It was a large arch over a bricked path, its cream-colored stone etched with large Roman-like block letters in all uppercase. The North American Academy of Magical Studies. Hermione looked over at him and gave a small smile. Well, there is more to its name than simple academy. I guess the goblet could tell. Harry shrugged. I suppose it's like the students just putting in the word Hogwarts or Durmstrang. Hermione nodded, then looked forward again. Harry followed her gaze. The entire school appeared to be gated inside large stone walls made of the same cream-colored stone as many of the Muggle buildings around it. It was odd to see such a school surrounded by a Muggle city on three sides. Directly behind them was the entrance to Columbia, a magical version of the town of Washington, D.C., hidden behind the same ward scheme that hid the school. Hermione took a deep breath, then nodded to herself. Well, let's just go for it. Should be able to find the headmaster's office without too much difficulty. Harry stepped up beside her and began to enter. Headmistress. Remus's letter said her name is Bate Valerian. Hermione nodded, then looked around as they passed large block buildings, before glancing over at him in surprise. This looks more like an old-fashioned Muggle town than a magical school. Harry couldn't help but agree. There wasn't simply one building, but many large square ones, laid out in some pattern he couldn't fathom from the ground. They followed a brick path that wound between the buildings, many of which had large stone steps leading up to double wooden doors. A few of the buildings even had column on the front of them, much like a Roman Colosseum. Hermione spoke again, her voice awed. I've seen buildings like these in pictures, in Muggle history class. From the colonial times, they built stone buildings like this for government places, or for governors and generals, important people who could afford the cost of stone. This is like the wizards just took over part of an old Muggle town. Harry began to answer, but a cheerful voice interrupted them from the right. Right you are. They turned from where they were walking and looked towards the voice. A teenage boy leaned against a large stone fountain, one foot propped up beside him, the other dangling barefoot in the sparkling water. He stared at them in open curiosity, his head propped up on one hand that was braced on his knee. The boy spoke again, his eyes a light tan color that seemed to spark with mischief. Used to be part of Thar Muggle City. Took quite a bit of work to spell it out of the history books. Quite a few wizards and witches participated in our revolution. Harry frowned. Revolution? Hermione glanced at him and shook her head. Honestly, Harry, didn't you pay any attention in primary school before Hogwarts, the American Revolution, when the colonies rebelled against British authority? Harry grimaced. I didn't really go to school long, Hermione. And Mr. Steele didn't consider American history to be very important. The boy, whom Harry had nearly forgotten, piped up at that. Sounds like a smart man. I feel much the same way. Hermione sniffed and crossed her arms. All history is important. At that, the boy snorted. You sound like Mr. Paul. Boring. Hermione glared, opened her mouth to speak, and Harry cut in before she could begin to scold the teenager. Do you know the way to Headmistress Valerian's office? The boy blinked, then grinned. You mean Principal Valerian? Sure. Why? Harry blinked. Hermione sniffed and spoke. We don't have to tell you why. We just need to speak to her. The boy lifted one shoulder in a careless shrug, then swung his leg around to the ground and slipped his feet into some sort of strapped sandal. When he stood, he towered over both Harry and Hermione, and Harry quickly realized the boy was probably at least 2 or 3 years older than them. Probably in his 7th year or this school's equivalent, Harry thought. Suit yourself. Forgive a boy for asking, your ladyship. The boy gave a mock bow, and Hermione flushed in embarrassed annoyance. Harry spoke, glancing at Hermione from the corner of his eyes where she stood, arms still crossed, eyes narrowed in anger. "Thanks, mister." The boy grinned and ran a freckled hand through brown hair that was streaked with blonde. "Dylan Sawyer. Just call me Dylan, please. Mr. Sawyer's my dad." Harry nodded once, and the boy gestured over his shoulder. "Principal's office is this way. All the teachers' offices are in the administration building, in the center of the academy's complex. No one wants to go there, usually means you're in trouble." Hermione pursed her lips and looked the tall boy over with narrowed eyes. "I'm guessing you've been there more than a time or two." Dylan looked back over his shoulder and grinned at her. "Let's just say me and Principal Valerian know each other very well." The academy student didn't speak again until they walked a short distance further, entering another large stone building decorated with the same columns they had seen coming in. He turned to them with curious eyes. "Come on, give a dog a bone. Why, here to see the principal, transferring in. Bit late for that, but it happens. Foreign exchange maybe. We get a few, never from Britain though. Always Japan, Brazil, sometimes Australia. Always heard you European wizards like to keep to yourselves." Harry looked over to Hermione, who eyed the boy with open annoyance, then settled for a half-truth. "We want to inquire about the Academy's policies for transfers, see what's required." Hermione looked over at him quickly, brows furrowed, but the boy let out whoop. "Sweet, be nice to have some new blood around here. They might have some new competition with the ladies." Dylan looked openly at Harry, who blanched. Ladies? Did he mean dating? Harry glanced at Hermione, who scowled at the boy, then settled for a quick shake of his head. "Ah, no. Don't have much time for that." Dylan laughed incredulously, then opened a glass door and entered the building, the interior startling cool. Hermione shivered at the temperature difference, and Dylan grinned. "New ward Mr. Fellies has designed. Calls it a heat ward, but in effect it's like a constant cooling spell. Ties it to ward stones on every exterior wall of the building, as well as the corners of the roof. Much easier on a square building like this, of course. Keeps the heat out and the cool in." Hermione's eyes widened, and she momentarily forgot her annoyance with the teen. "Really? I've never heard of anything like it." The boy laughed again. The sound echoed off the polished marble floors of the hallway as they walked. "You two really need to get out. As in, out of your continent. We've had heat wards for ages. Not as good as this, of course, and they are quite expensive. Takes a real powerful wizard to set one up that lasts more than a week without a recharge, and paying for recharges is, well, stiff. Still, this new type might be able to be activated at a much lower cost. Lasts a good month, too, beats out the older ones on the dormitories." Hermione looked around eagerly. "Can we see one of these wardstones?" The boy grinned. "Sweetheart, you will see enough ward stones to be sick of 'em if you transfer here." Hermione actually flushed. Harry narrowed his eyes at the boy. Sweetheart, was he flirting? Before the boy could say more, he turned with a flourish and gestured at a wooden door that looked identical to several they had already passed. "Principal Valerian's office. Now, if you'll excuse me, I must vamos. You see, class is in session, and I am most definitely not." With a salute, the boy trotted off. Harry and Hermione watched him go, then turned to each other. Hermione bit her lip, then shook her head. "This feels so surreal. I can't believe I'm even here and just talking to him. What are we going to do, Harry? Just waltz in there and what?" Harry gently pressed a hand to hers, smiled. "Ask her about the tournament, why the school won't participate. Go from there." Hermione didn't look convinced, but she nodded. Harry turned to the wooden door, looked at the name that was imprinted on a plaque next to the door. Principal Valerian. He reached out and knocked firmly 3 times. There was a second's pause, then a light female voice called out, "It's open." Harry glanced one last time at Hermione, then pushed open the door, stepping into a large box-like office that was as far from the ornate grandeur of Dumbledore's as one could get. 3 of the walls were covered from floor to ceiling in bookshelves, and at first glance, Harry saw several magical instruments also gracing the shelves. The wall straight ahead, beside a large wooden desk beside them, was a single glass window that looked out onto the school's main round courtyard, a large brick fountain gracing the middle, surrounded by various manicured trees. Seated at the desk, an older woman looked at them with extremely vivid violet eyes, their purple hue seeming to shine out at them from a pale face. "And who are you two?" The woman spoke in a cultured accent, each word enunciated properly, very far from the lazy accent Dylan had spouted. Harry stepped inside the office, heard Hermione stand beside him, and answered, "I am Harry Potter. This is Hermione Granger." The woman leaned back in her leather chair and rapped a muggle pen sharply against her desk. "Ah, Miss Granger, the British girl. I spoke with a Norwegian official at quite a late hour last night. I do not like being summoned for an emergency meeting with my own ministry about a tournament this school has never and will never participate in. This scheme of yours, young lady, will not implicate the academy." Hermione gaped, then quickly shook her head. "No. I mean, Madam Valerian, I did not enter my name into the tournament. I would never do that. I do not want to compete." The principal narrowed her piercing eyes. "That is neither here nor there. I have spoken with my own board this very morning. There is no legal obligation on the Academy's part to fund your competition, not any obligation to risk any of our students on that barbaric tournament. I have heard of it. The news that it was being continued on your continent did not surprise me. But we are modern witches, Miss Granger, and will not be drawn into such a political nightmare if something were to go wrong, or heaven forbid, a student be seriously injured." Hermione gasped, shook her head again with desperate denial. Harry began to speak, stepping closer to the desk. "Principal Valerian, we're not asking for money, or for you to offer any students to join her team. Hermione is going to be forced to compete due to the use of a magical artifact." The principal waved one hand, her fingers long and elegant, and bearing a few stains from brewing. "I heard. The Goblet of Fire, forcing students under magical contract. Barbaric." Harry forced down his anger at being interrupted and continued. "Yes, and she will have to compete under the Academy's name, whether she likes it or not. I ask instead that you allow me to enroll at the Academy and compete beside her in the tournament. As dangerous as it is, I hope that you will see reason and acknowledge that she should not have to compete alone." The principal raised an arched brow. You said your name was—" Harry straightened. "Harry Potter." The woman's eyes roamed over him, hesitated over his forehead. Then she rapped her pen again against her desktop. "Ah, the one Nicholas Flamel tutored. I've heard of you. Boy caused quite a fuss in Britain a few years back, if I remember correctly. Why should I let you enroll in this institution? Even if only to help your friend, you would still be reflecting back on my school. You've taken none of the tests. We take only the best here, and the waiting list is a mile long." Harry didn't try for humble. This was his best chance to helping Hermione, and maybe the only one. He let his power free from the boundaries he placed upon it, coil upon coil, like releasing a tightly rolled-up cord of rope. It filled the air around them, heavy and dark, ruffling the pages on the desk in front of where he stood, sending sparks of verdant light from an instrument beside them. The air smelled heavily of metal and electricity. Harry spoke softly, and heard the voices behind his own, one like fire, the other moonlight. "Zachary Griffin told me power also means much, in matters like this." The principal's face didn't falter for a long moment as she observed him. Then she grimaced. "I should have known one like you would know his ilk. I was principal here when that one enrolled, and never was I more glad to see the back of a student. Very well. Repress your magic, please, before you break one of my instruments." Harry quickly did so, uncomfortable with showing so much of his strength to a virtual stranger. Hermione reached out and took his hand, her mind brushing against his own with the impression of gratitude, like a blue-green splash of cool water. Principal Valerian straightened the papers on her desk briskly before reaching down into a drawer and beginning to shuffle through files before withdrawing a single sheet of paper. She placed it down in front of him. "First lesson about North America, Mr. Potter. There is a form for everything." Harry spent what felt like hours going through one form after another, Hermione at his side, filling out much of the same paperwork. The principal was fast and efficient as she explained each one. "The Bureau is very strict on parental permission under 18, which is virtually everyone in school. Who is your current guardian?" Harry grimaced. "Remus Lupin, until January 1st. The principal raised a brow in what Harry was getting used to as a signature gesture of skepticism. "Why the 1st? He is a werewolf, and that is when new laws come into effect. After that, unless a new guardian is found, I will be a ward of the British ministry." Harry knew his tone spoke of how much he liked that option. The principal grimaced in turn, the gesture showcasing the beginnings of deep wrinkles around her mouth. She had given off a sense of vitality and youth until that moment, though her hair, a rich mahogany color, had vivid streaks of white beginning to spiral through its tight bun. She was probably into her first century, but witches and wizards aged well. This presents a problem, Mr. Potter. You are a national treasure, of that I have no doubt. I abhor politics, but have been forced to play the game a time or two. Mages and potential mages are encouraged to stay within the borders of their respective home countries. Your kind, quite simply, cause too much of a fuss wherever you go. It will be difficult to transfer guardianship of an orphan to a foreigner, even that of a school. Harry straightened from where he sat. In a small desk the principal had conjured for them to fill out their paperwork. In light of the situation, they have no choice. I have been accepted into the academy, a school recognized as a superior institution. It would be an insult to the North American ministry to deny me my choice under the grounds of my safety. A hint of a smile played about Principal Valerian's lips. Bureau, child. Only across the ocean are our governments referred to as ministries, and I see you have some rudimentary knowledge of politics yourself. Very well. This, I will take care of myself. You too will be assigned what we call an advisor, a teacher to guide you in your studies until you graduate. Hermione spoke up, brown eyes cautious. We will be at the Durmstrang Institute the rest of this school year. Madam, will the Academy be willing to send this advisor with us to continue our schooling? Trust Hermione to be worried about getting her schoolwork done. Harry sent her a fond glance. Valerian smiled for the first time since they had stepped into her office. I am agreeing to this scheme, setting my school's reputation on the two of you. Rest assured I will make sure it is a good impression you give. We may have a hard time arranging a representative to go with you, however. Europe is not known to be kind to us, and vice versa. There is bad blood between the wizards of our two countries, for we took the side of our muggle population in their bid for succession from Britain, set a dangerous precedent, nearly started a war on its own within the newly formed Iqua. It was not so long ago, in wizarding lifetimes. Harry grimaced at another mention of a historic event he had no knowledge of. It appeared he would need to get his hands on some more history books, both muggle and magical. Hermione nodded. There was silence again, the scratch of Hermione's pen against paper. Harry watched her for a moment, his mind jumping from problem to problem. It appeared the wizards here did not use quills, he thought absently, watching the ink pens on the principal's desk. But what were they going to do about a third member? Did they really need one? Would one of his other friends also insist on switching? Merlin's beard would Draco. Harry felt horror rising in him at the thought of a Malfoy in America. A knock sounded at the door. The principal looked up with a frown. "It's open," she said, an annoyed look on her face. The door opened with a bang, and an angry witch stomped in, leading behind her a smiling Dylan. This boy, and I say boy because that is how he acts, he is no young man, has not only skipped his morning classes again, but was also caught with his feet in the western fountain. This behavior cannot be tolerated. I insist he be suspended. When it is not the fountain, it is charming crickets under his roommates' beds. When it is not those infernal crickets, it is the despicable graffiti he charmed onto the cafeteria walls. And last week, he warded the Transfiguration classroom so that only the witches could enter, and Mr. Smithwick was locked out as well as all the male students. It is abominable that he has escaped true punishment this far. His family cannot stop us from enforcing the rules. The witch spouted off in one tirade, her hands gesturing wildly with each sentence. Dylan spoke up, sending one wink towards Hermione, who with Harry had gone unnoticed by the spewing professor. First off, I've already proved I can do all the material being taught this morning. Also, I've read that water therapy can be very beneficial to many wizards as a relaxation technique, which, Mrs. Adams, I must say you could benefit from. The professor began to speak, but Dylan continued, his voice innocent. The crickets are also a relaxation technique, and Charles and Jeff really need to chill out about my house guests and sleep more deeply. The graffiti is actually modern art. Trust me, I have a source that swears it helps students get over the miserable food served in the cafeteria by distracting them. And I warded the Transfiguration classroom because the lovely ladies told me that they could work better without male influence. so I strove my best to give it to them for one blessed evening. Dylan smiled beatifically at the end of his long explanation, looking for all the world like a star student finishing up a perfect explanation of Charm's theory. The aforementioned Mrs. Adams, however, looked apoplectic. Principal Valerian sighed. Mrs. Adams, all of the grievances you have mentioned prior to this morning were dealt with in the usual way by removal of privileges. His family, as esteemed as they are, do not influence me in regards to the way I treat my students. The rebuke was clear, and Mrs. Adams obviously felt it, for she stiffened noticeably. Valerian continued. As for this morning's infractions, the professors, of which you are one, may punish him as deemed necessary. Mr. Sawyer, please keep your person out of the school's water fixtures. Dylan got an impish look on his face, then visibly seemed to hold back a retort. The professor, on the other hand, was not pleased. Principal Valerian, I truly think disobedience of this level deserves harsher punishment. He has no respect. He does not follow the rules, and disdains to obey any order myself and others give. I cannot. I will not stand for it. The last was said on a firm note. For the first time, Dylan's smile faded. His strikingly tan eyes sobered. Principal Valerian lowered the pen she had begun to pick up. Very well, I will deal with this. Miss Adams looked like she wanted to say more. Instead, she turned and started when she saw Harry and Hermione looking on. She sneered in a move reminiscent of Snape and left just as dramatically, the door nearly slamming behind her. In her absence, the principal sighed again. Mr. Sawyer, we spoke of this just last week. You must not continue to antagonize the staff. You will graduate this term, so help me God, and be off our hands. Must you torment me? The principal's voice was a mixture of fond and exasperated. Harry thought her tone was like one of an aunt for a nephew who had gotten in trouble. He supposed it was possible they were related, though they did not share a common surname. Dylan looked back at them, then began to smile once again. Principal, may I formally request to join the Academy's team for the Triwizard Tournament? Hermione dropped her pen. Harry's eyes widened. The principal looked truly startled. Her violet eyes widened. Then they narrowed. You have been eavesdropping again. It was a simple statement. Dylan ignored it. It's an obvious solution, you know. Family insists I stay in school when I know I could have passed the exams last year. Teachers dislike my attitude. Classmates despise my good looks, and you, principal, want me off your hands. Helps everybody. Principal Valerian didn't look helped. She looked angry. Mr. Sawyer, get out, now. Dylan dramatically fell to his knees and lifted two hands clasped together in supplication. Oh, great Principal Valerian, look kindly upon your humble student. I wish to seek my fortune, to make my own fame, to brave the waters of foreign nations, to... out. Valerian barked and pointed one finger towards the door. Morose, the teen got to his feet and headed out, his head down. As he opened the door, he glanced back, light eyes serious. It could be extracurricular, and you need someone actually from America on our team. Who else do you have that can go without problems? You know, I have the skill, and my family the backbone to support us. The principal remained silent, and Dylan turned and left, the door closing with a gentle snick. For a long moment, Valerian watched it. As she turned to them, looking them over with contemplative eyes. Hermione glanced at Harry, then reached down to take her pen off the floor where it had rolled when she dropped it. Harry looked at the principal, who sighed again. He's right, the blasted boy. If you can put up with him, he is one of our best students. Takes too much after his flighty cousin, and too smart for his own good. Boredom is his curse, and he handles it badly. Idle hands, and so forth. Harry had a sinking sensation. He ignored Hermione's begging glance and cleared his throat. His cousin, Principal Valerian, smiled grimly. Oh, yes, and I may, perhaps, know just the alumni to go with you three to this Durmstrang Institute. Great with translation spells and just about everything else. And with our young Mr. Sawyer going, family pressure may be just great enough to pry him out of that werewolf sanctuary in the Carolinas. Kyle knew he looked ridiculous. He was crouched over his laptop at the construction site, looking over the photos with wide-eyed excitement. Incredible. There was the magical alley in Sydney, Australia, his own hometown. There was a version of Australia's Stonehenge he had never seen before, with wizards strutting about, sticks, wands raised in their hands. Was that a dragon? It was a dragon. Sir, Kyle started, then looked up with rapid blinks before smiling shyly. Sorry, Billy boy. Got a bit excited about this. He reluctantly closed the laptop. You guys done with the framework? Yes, sir. His site manager, William Baker, was used to Kyle oddities and didn't question it. Ever since the accident that nearly claimed Kyle's life, his boss had never quite been the same. I'll be there in a moment. Billy walked off, and Kyle stood, cradling his laptop in his large, calloused hands. Even more proof now. Kyle could use these pictures to convince those who still thought him mad, a man whose accident had screwed with his head. But it hadn't. Kyle remembered it all clear as day. It had rained that morning years ago. The steel framework had been slippery, and his rope had snagged on something sharp, and he had fallen. He remembered that the falling 3 stories legs first, and how the overwhelming pain had taken him, first ankles, then knees, then hips. He figured even if he hadn't died, he would never work in construction again, would never walk, never run, never be able to play with his son in their front yard. His men had been on the other side of the property. No one had seen, no one had heard, except the oddly dressed woman passing by, and her shriek had echoed in his ears louder than the haze that filled them. He remembered so vividly how she had leaned over him, her eyes so beautiful and full of tears, and she had hesitated there looking at him. Then the pain was gone, pace by pace, a cool numbness settling over him, until he felt his legs being moved and things inside them moved, but not pain. And the lady had whispered things, not to him but to herself as she looked him over, and there had been something in her hand, something glowing and beautiful and peaceful. When she knelt over him again to look in his eyes, she had been exhausted, eyes weary. She had leaned over him, lips close to his ear, and whispered in an accent he could not place. If you remember me, tell no one for my own sake. This never happened, you never fell. Kyle had tried to speak, but something else had come over him, a wave of sleep he could not fight, her voice ringing in his ear. Stupefy. When he awoke, in a hospital, they had thought he had a minor stroke. His body showed signs of major stress, but he was fine. His legs were in better shape than they had ever been. Even the arthritis that had begun to pain him since he turned 40 was gone. The woman had cured him, had healed him, but it had taken years for him to find anything close to the truth. He hadn't been able to keep silent about his experience. He looked first to religion, thinking her a prophet or apostle. Then he had turned to the occult, thinking her a Wiccan mystic. His wife thought him insane, but he didn't truly blame her. The truth had been both more simple and more complicated. The witch, for that was what she was, had broken her own rules to cure him, and Kyle loved her for it. He would suffer none of his new followers to disparage wizards for hiding, never allow them to even speak of harming them in any way. The beings were blessed with great power. They were probably afraid, that was all, of being used and abused. But Kyle would never hurt them. He wanted, in his own way, to serve them, to thank them, to help them. And so his followers wanted that as well. They heard only the glory of magic, its potential, its majesty, and they would follow him in his quest to bring the magical world together with the mundane, if only to show the world how wonderful magic and its users were. Kyle slid his laptop in his case and walked towards the new framework with a jaunty step on legs that still, even 5 years later, gave him no pain. He would never stop trying to thank them for what that one witch had done for him. Never. Neville wrung his hands together, facing off against 8 pairs of eyes, half of them confused, the other half angry, and all of them shocked. Draco was the first to speak, his voice deadly. Hermione, in the Triwizard Tournament. Neville sat down with a plop and folded the letter again in his hands. He had summarized it as best he could for the group, as soon as he had managed to get them all together. Hermione's absence hadn't been noted at breakfast, but by lunch a few had asked him if she was sick. When Neville realized McGonagall wasn't going to say anything, at least not yet, he realized he really needed to get every member of their study group together. Now, he wished he would have told Blaise and Draco privately first. Smith spoke next into the growing silence, his voice droll. Does this mean we have to find another duelist for our group? Draco whirled on the Hufflepuff, his voice deadly. We just find out that one of ours is being forced into that tournament, and all you can think about is yourself. His voice raised on the last word, nearly shouting. Smith leaned back from the Slytherin, eyes wide. Padma snorted. We only have her word she was forced. She could have snuck her name in somehow. Draco snarled, but Blaise beat his friend to it with a grim and deadly calm voice. You may not know her as well as we, But Hermione is not the type to willingly break a rule, especially for something like this. She has no reason to. Daphne raised an eyebrow. Money, fame. Terry narrowed his eyes at the brunette, who only met his gaze with casual grace. Hermione doesn't need any more fame. You can tell she isn't comfortable as it is with what she has, being Potter's friend and all. Daphne only twirled a long strand of hair around her finger. And money, she asserted casually, a subtle dig at the girl's muggle origin. At that, Suli chimed in, her voice bright and slightly biting. Oh, don't be catty. You know as well as I do, Daphne, that she has Potter wrapped around her finger. She only has to ask, and he would lay his vault at her feet. I heard a rumor the other day that they've been meeting secretly right here at Hogwarts. Lavender told me they. Shut it, Terry snapped at his housemate. Don't repeat those idiotic rumors. He turned back to Daphne with angry eyes. Point is, Hermione didn't enter that tournament. Someone put her there on purpose, probably to purposefully put her in danger. Padma scoffed. Why, that's just as idiotic as what Lavender claims. Who would want a muggle born in the tournament? Makes no sense. Draco turned to Blaise and Neville as the Ravenclaws continued to bicker, his voice low and urgent. It's about Harry, isn't it? Did she contact him? Who are her other teammates? Is there anything we can do? Neville again squeezed the parchment in his hand, then spoke again, letting his voice carry to the others. Hermione was entered under the name of an American school, the Academy. She said Harry was going to take her there today. I don't know anything else. Draco sat back, his grey eyes expressionless. Smith spoke up again, idly leaning forward to look around at them all. So, we are out a member of our team. What are we going to do about it? There was silence for a long moment. Draco seemed lost in thought, and the two Ravenclaw girls exchanged glances with Daphne, who shrugged before speaking. Well, we only have one Gryffindor and Hufflepuff now, and 3 Slytherins and 4 Ravenclaws. I say we look for another Hufflepuff. There's a few girls I know of that aren't too catty. I could talk to them, see if any are interested. Smith snorted, but didn't say anything. Neville reluctantly nodded. If we are trying to stick to our own year, I don't think any of my own house are suited. That was one way to put it. The boys of his house ignored him, and the girls strongly disliked Hermione, the rumors of which they were spreading were solid proof of that fact. Neville sighed. I guess that's that then. Almost as one, those gathered began to disperse, Anthony following a ranting Terry from the room, Zaharias Smith simply gliding out without a word, and Daphne, Padma, and Sue following behind, still arguing over the validity of the recent rumors, which left Blaise and Draco sitting across from him, the 2 Slytherins staring him down with equally bland eyes, though Draco's held a hint of heat. Neville quickly shook his head. I wanted to tell them all, I thought. Maybe McGonagall would announce something as acting headmistress while Dumbledore is gone. But she didn't, so I couldn't let it wait. People are going to be talking soon. Blaise spoke up, his voice deeper now than it had been the previous year, yet still smooth and cultured. Neville envied him that, as his voice still retained an occasional boyish squeak. I'm worried about her. It's obvious, the motives, once you consider who Hermione is. Everyone with half a brain should be able to see it. I'm sure the headmaster and McGonagall have as well, and that is part of why they have refrained from making an announcement. Draco spoke up now, a cool facade covering his earlier lapse. Harry is going to try to join her, isn't he? Neville opened his mouth, closed it. That was the same thought he had had, and the same thing he would have done had he been Harry. Draco continued, not waiting for a response. She didn't ask any of us. They need a third person. Blaise quietly interrupted his housemate, voice oddly soothing. It will be difficult as it is for Harry to compete. He will have to register under this school's name. At least he is not already enrolled in another school. You would have to leave Hogwarts, travel to America, apply there, be received. The process could take weeks, if you are even accepted. And you, an heir to one of Britain's pureblood families, working with one of their schools, your reputation would suffer. Your family's reputation would suffer. As a Malfoy. Damn the Malfoys, Draco spat out, jumping to his feet, his mask shattering as he paced. Damn my father, don't you see? This is it. This is the beginning of it all. I've suspected it since the beginning of this bloody tournament. Just like at the World Cup, the world watching. But then, with it taking place at Durmstrang, nowhere near us here. Draco turned to face them, his eyes bleak as the anger drained away. Away from us here. My father met with the Norwegian delegate, that H. Hjalmar Gyldenpalm. Weeks ago, I didn't even know who he was. But I found out just 3 days ago. He is the organizer for the challenges at Durmstrang that the competitors are to compete in. Why would he meet with father? And yet I thought perhaps, but none of it had to do with us. Then this. Draco gestured loosely around them, as if to take in the entire room. Hermione, forced to compete. I'm sure they made it so there was no way for her to get out of it. And who would follow her? Harry Bloody Potter. All for him, and us, the pureblood heirs, their precious heirs, kept out of it where we can't interfere. They will be alone, surrounded by who knows how many enemies. Neville finally spoke, shaking his head. Draco, there hasn't been evidence at all, other than the cup, of any gathering of Death Eaters. The papers pass it off as a one-time demonstration, an outlet for certain elements rebelling against increased ministry control. Draco waved a hand sharply, snarled. Ministry propaganda. Fudge doesn't want to seem like he has no control. He always has to have the upper hand, or at least pretend he does. Blaise, tell me I'm not alone in thinking this is some plot. Before Blaise could answer, Neville stood, for once meeting Draco head-to-head. Plot to what? Merlin's beard, Draco. You haven't been the same since term began. All this talk of Death Eaters, and you know who, we've barely even discussed our plans about the minister. Draco shook his head wildly, whirled around and then back again, pushing a finger into Neville's chest. Because it's no longer just the minister I'm worried about. Who replaces him? You know as well as I that my father held the purse strings of the minister's office. He funded his campaigns. He bribed officials so blatantly it was a joke. Now, suddenly, he has stopped. I listen, Neville. Nothing better to do in our manor, and it keeps a Slytherin alive to know what predators are about. They are planning something too. My father, this H. Jalmer, whomever else is involved. And it has to do with this tournament. It's the link. Neville stepped back, frowned even as he shook his head, brown eyes confused. But what can they do? Your father is powerful in wealth, influence, but he is no Dark Lord. I don't even know of any who can claim that kind of power, not in Britain. Not even in all of Scandinavia, which is the region where Durmstrang is. It takes a mage, a wizard or witch of incredible power to lead the kind of rebellion you are hinting at. For wizards and witches to follow, we would know their name. There was a heated pause. Blaise stepped forward and his black eyes were dark and hooded. Quietly he spoke, the words filling the space. But we do know his name, Neville. We are all simply afraid to say it. Draco looked away, out the window, his skin pale and drawn. Neville sucked in a breath, shook his head once, then again, looking between the two Slytherins with pleading eyes. He's dead. He was defeated. Blaise only reached out, laid a firm hand on Neville's shoulder. Best place to hide, isn't it? While you lick your wounds. A true Slytherin goes someplace you won't be searched for. Dead fits the bill right enough. But we already knew a part of him wasn't. Think what Harry has told us already, that spirit during first year. The name on that diary in second. Riddle. A student here, back when the chamber was first opened. I've researched it all, filling in the missing blanks while I was out, digging deeper. Tom Marvolo riddle. Not very clever, really. Rearrange the letters and you get. Blaise hesitated, stopped before he said the name. Neville closed his eyes and nodded, head down in defeat. Into the silence, Draco spoke, his voice dark. I'll never join them, and I'll never forgive him if she is hurt. The blonde turned and strode from the room, his boot heels clicking on the stone. Neville looked up and watched him go, and wondered dully just who he was referring to. His father, Harry, he who must not be named. And now, for our weird story of the day, Earl. The pristine newswoman turned to a handsome man, shuffling a stack of papers in his hands. He grinned with a wide smile, his perfect teeth gleaming for the camera. That's right, Sandy. Now this is truly an odd one. How so? Sandy questioned, taking up her part of the rehearsed conversation. Earl's smile never dimmed. Well, it seems there may be a group out there who say magic is real, and they have proof. Sandy batted her eyelashes in obvious feigned surprise. Really? I've heard similar talk before. Earl only laughed. Never like this. This one truly takes the cake. Our sources say not only do they claim to have dates and places of arcane instances, but they have photographic evidence of magical places and creatures. Daniel, show our viewers. The screen flickered, and a large picture of a black dragon soared across the screen, bat-like wings seeming to whip the air as its claws clenched. Its large head was swung around, and two yellow eyes looked directly into the screen. The screen flickered again, in time to catch the woman's shudder. Now that does look real, Earl. I almost believe it myself. The man smiled his special television-ready smile and patted her arm. Me too, Sandy. Now, in further news, the developments in the... Harry sat at his desk in his bedroom and stared blankly at his trunk. He had dropped Hermione off hours ago to do the same thing as himself, pack for a few months' stay at Durmstrang. He had packed most of what he thought he might need. The glory of house elves was their easy ability to move around unnoticed. He could send Darby for anything he forgot. Turning, Harry looked to where the house elf was standing beside the bed, green eyes focused earnestly on him. A question he had been considering rose in his mind, and he wondered if his own house elf could shed some light on it. Darby, Durmstrang is bound to have house elves, correct? How trustworthy can they be? Darby blinked, his large hands wringing together as he thought, before he answered in a high-pitched voice. I is not sure about Durmstrang, Master Harry, sir, but elves are bound not to harm witches and wizards, sir. Harry only frowned, leaning back in his chair. Maybe not directly. But they can spy on us, right? Or what is the line when it comes to harm? Can they drug us, put a potion in our food, or lay a trap in our rooms, one made by wizards and triggered by wizards, merely delivered by the house elf? Darby moaned in horror, his hands clenching into fists. Darby cannot tell, Master. Darby does not know. Harry waited a beat, seeing the distress the elf was in, and hesitated. The house elf was obviously bothered by the thought. But would you do that for me, Darby? If I asked you to, would you spy for me? Would you put something in someone's food? Darby trembled, but lifted his chin. His eyes were earnest now, his face showing every emotion that passed. Master is the bestest, nicest master Darby could ever have. For Master, Darby would do this thing, though Darby does not like it. Harry slowly nodded, then looked away with a sigh. Don't worry about it, Darby. I'm not asking you to do any of those things. The elf wilted in relief. Harry continued, looking out his window. That's about what I thought, though. It will most likely be the same for any Durmstrang elves. I don't know what kind of rooms they will give us, but we cannot trust whatever safeguards are in place. Not alone. And if I've learned anything, it is that house elves are extremely useful and seldom expected to be anything than a simple servant. It would be an easy way for someone to do us harm, to work through them. Harry linked his hands together, frowned, then turned back to Darby. I would like you to come with us to Durmstrang, if you are willing. It will be Hermione and I, and two others at least. Maybe Blossom or Ivy can come as well. Take care of Hermione personally. I don't want any other elves in whatever rooms we are given, and plan to ward them accordingly. Darby quickly nodded, his large ears flapping at the gesture. Darby would be honored, sir. Harry smiled at his exuberance, then sighed again, feeling abruptly burdened. I don't know what to do about our food. Cast charms on it, I suppose. Make sure Hermione knows them as well. I feel as if I am going into an enemy camp. It's so obviously a trap. Darby stepped forward and snapped one long finger as he spoke quickly. I can check Master and Mistress's food. House elves know how to do this thing, to check for rot and mold and mischief. Harry blinked in surprise, then grinned. He should have suspected as much. Wizards and witches still lived in many ways as if they were still in the Dark Ages. He supposed worrying about such things shouldn't be so surprising. Thank you. I guess mainly stay close if possible if you can avoid being noticed, especially to Hermione. Darby bowed at the waist, his hand reaching out with a flourish, before the elf grinned widely, showcasing a row of square yellow teeth. Wizards never noticed Darby. After the house elf left, Harry double-checked he had his things, then stood, looking around his bare room. He wondered why wizards hadn't tried making armies of house elves, or why they were satisfied with simply keeping them as servants. The beings could easily use wandless magic. In many ways, they seemed more powerful than the goblins. Only their attitude was different, subservient, and peaceful, if they were ever stirred to wrath. Well, Harry figured they would be a force to be reckoned with. He reached down and hefted his family trunk, the large case sealed with his blood, and called up Flame. Time to brave Hermione's parents one more time. This group claims magic is real. The pictures, of course, are masters of deception, but the accompanying information available is causing concern across the country. Dave, I tell you, we've done some preliminary research on these children, and there is no record for many after the age of 11. We're talking a widespread, even global, kidnapping scheme. The newswoman's face was sober. The man across from her smiled condescendingly. That sounds as likely as this group's claim that magic is real, Cindy. Right underneath, The children's names are lists of magical places that do not exist. I've driven by one of the supposed sites every day on my way to work. There is nothing there. I think, what a load of crock, came the explicative from a large woman who reclined on her sofa before she changed the channel. Hermione embraced her parents, then stepped back to Harry, holding her school trunk and the shrunken cages for Hedwig and Crookshanks. Darby would retrieve the animals once they were settled wherever it was they were taken. Mrs. Granger smiled brightly and waved with one hand, the other looped through her husband's. Good luck with your competition. Send me an owl with that lovely Hedwig once you are settled in. I will, Mum. Hermione smiled, then shifted her feet. Mr. Granger nodded to Harry, his brown eyes piercing. Harry, take care. Harry nodded back quickly, then took Hermione's hand in his. With a last wave to her parents, Hermione looked up at him and smiled. Harry raised his flame and took them away, traveling straight to the entrance of the academy. It was late afternoon here, the sun only just beginning to set. Lamps with flickering flames darted the path ahead of them, lighting their way as they walked under the arched gate, heading towards the administrative building. Beside him, Hermione sighed. I can't believe they decided to send that boy with us. He's not very serious. Harry wanted to smile at her exasperation, but kept his neutral face. It could always be worse. Imagine we had someone like Smith. Hermione curled her lip, then laughed. You're right. They walked a moment more in silence, then Hermione glanced up at him. You never had time to tell me more about this Griffin fellow. Who is he? How did you meet him? Harry frowned at the reminder. There hadn't been time between leaving Hermione to pack and leaving the academy. I met him while meeting Remus for a full moon at the werewolf commune. Hermione looked over in surprise. He's a werewolf. Harry shook his head. No, he just lives there. I haven't talked to him much about himself anyway, but he implied he was trying to get away from publicity by living there. He has a friend who is a werewolf. Apparently, he's some sort of big deal here. Like a younger Dumbledore, but nicer. Harry finished lamely, then shrugged at Hermione's frown. He's wealthy, probably pureblood, based on the comments about his family. He's probably around Sirius's age, though it's hard to tell with wizards. Eccentric too, and doesn't shut up for a second if you get him started. Hermione laughed. Well, that does sound like he's related to Dylan then. If they are related, they don't share the same last name. Harry shrugged. That's all I know. And he's powerful, Hermione. I've only felt power like that from Dumbledore and Flamel. Not as strong, maybe, but still much more than a normal wizard. Flamel called people like that mages. Hermione stopped, turning to face him with wide eyes. Mages, but I've read that wizards of that caliber only come around every century or so. Harry smiled slightly. Maybe every century or so in one given country. World's a big place. Griffin implied there are several around, men and women, ones even near our age. Hermione only shook her head, eyes troubled. It's easy, I guess, to think of someone like Flamel having so much power. Even Dumbledore. Were old, much older than us, and known to be wise. She drifted off, then only looked down. Harry stepped closer to her, voice soft. They had nearly reached the administrative building, and it loomed above them, its cream pillars glimmering red in the torchlight. It's all right. Flamel told me something about mages. He said normal people didn't like to think about them until after they are dead and gone. Wizards that powerful are dangerous, not because of what they will do, but because of what they could do if they wanted. I think normal wizards think of mages the same way muggles would think of wizards if they knew we existed. Hermione's head whipped up, brown eyes meeting his own. You mean with fear and suspicion? I never thought I would be guilty of thinking the same way. But it's different when you are on the other side of the equation, knowing there will be a wizard with us, teaching us, that is as powerful as Dumbledore, one I don't even know. Harry smiled slightly. Nearly as powerful. And I don't think we have anything to worry about with him. You will probably like him. He seems the type to read books as avidly as you do. Hermione rolled her eyes and shoved him lightly, before beginning to walk in step with him. After a pause, as they reached the door, she looked over at him again. What about you? Harry frowned and stopped. Me? Hermione lifted one shoulder nonchalantly, but kept his gaze. Yes, I know you are one of these mages too. I could fathom as much from things Draco and the others have said about the things you can do. Wandless magic especially, not even factoring in the things you can do with your runes. How do you fit in? Harry looked away from her direct eyes, out over the silent courtyard. I don't really think of myself as a mage. Flamel implied as much, that I had that sort of power. It's why we talked about it. It's not something a lot of wizards advertise. Most try to pretend to be normal. They use wands, don't make too many waves, conform to society in most ways, like Dumbledore and Griffin. The ones who don't can be like Voldemort or Grindelwald, declaring themselves a lord and trying to rule the world. Change it by force instead of diplomacy. Flamel says only Merlin was different, finding the middle ground between, and he had to continuously fight other wizards who wanted him dead just because of what he was. For some people, given a taste of power, they only want more and more. It's not enough to be among the most powerful of the wizarding world. They want to be known as the greatest of them. Hermione frowned, crossing her arms. So what is your plan, then? Try to hide what you are capable of forever. Harry returned his gaze to her, smiled sadly. Once, maybe. Now I'm afraid that what I want the wizarding world to be will force me down the same path as Tom Riddle and Gellert Grindelwald. I don't want to be a tyrant, but I also don't want to see petty politics and rivalries and fear keep us stuck in the prejudiced form we are in. I'm trying to find the balance myself between forcing people to change and helping them see that they need change. Hermione reached out, grasped his hand with a firm grip. Well, you're not alone. Harry's smile turned more genuine, and he nodded back. Knock it off, lovebirds. The cheerful voice caused Hermione to drop his hand as if scolded, whirling to face a grinning Dylan Sawyer. The boy continued to speak as he ascended the stairs, pulling a large, ornate trunk behind him, its bronze buckles gleaming. I really wasn't sure what to pack, so I brought some of everything. Principal Valerian said this place is in the mountains somewhere. I take it that means cold. No one seems to know just what the place is like. In fact, Jeremy tells me he read that no one outside the school has ever been there. Well, he's obviously wrong. With that, the boy let his trunk fall to the stone with a heavy thunk and grinned at them. Hermione didn't look at Harry, a red flush coming to her cheeks. Harry looked at her curiously, then smiled at the boy and shrugged. I did the same, a little of everything. If we need more, we will make a trip back. Dylan raised an eyebrow. I was under the impression we would be stuck in this place once we get there until this tournament is over. Harry blinked, and Hermione poked him in the side, before smiling a little too wide at the American. Harry didn't mean us, of course. He just, has a house elf who can come and get more clothes for us. That's all. Harry nodded quickly, kicking himself for being so lax. He might have been able to use apparition as an excuse. If it hadn't been obvious it would be across oceans. Wizards couldn't apparate that far. Hermione had managed to neatly cover his slip. Dylan grinned. Great. It'll come in handy to have one of the little buggers with us. My family's got two, but they take care of the house. I'd never be able to convince my mum to send one with us. Harry nodded politely, then held open the door for Hermione to go through, following her with Dylan as they headed towards the principal's office. Dylan kept speaking, his voice eager. Isn't this just the greatest? I tell you, it wasn't coincidence I saw you two yesterday. I was meant to compete in this tournament. This has got to be the most exciting thing that has ever happened to me in my life. Harry was relieved when they reached the office and quickly jerked open the door without waiting for permission. Inside, Principal Valerian looked up from her seat, purple eyes narrowed. Sitting across from her, one leg cross over the other, was Zachary Griffin. His dirty blonde hair was ruffled slightly, his piercing blue eyes bright and full of humor. He wore an elegant sapphire dress robe, its silver buttons polished to a gleam. Along the front of the garment, silver threads spiraled and looped, creating a vague runic pattern Harry couldn't interpret. The wizard leapt to his feet with effortless grace, speaking in an eager voice. Splendid. The kids are all here. I told you, Bate. Exactly 5 minutes past the hour. Stopped to talk along the way, most likely. If they would have been 10 minutes late, then that would mean they got a tad lost. Bait. Harry glanced at the academy's principal, who looked at the ceiling as if looking for an answer to her prayers. Then the older woman sighed. Miss Granger, Mr. Potter, Mr. Sawyer. Professor Griffin has generously agreed to accompany you as a representative of the academy and take charge of your schooling while you are away from the school. Treat him with respect. Her voice sounded harried. Harry looked the man over again. Professor, he didn't know the man taught at the school. In fact, the principal had implied the exact opposite. Dylan spoke up, voiced the same cheerful quality as his cousin. Zack, I knew Aunt Gertrude would have at you till you agreed. Griffin rolled his eyes dramatically, raising a hand to his chest. The woman is a force of nature. As it was, couldn't have my favorite relative going abroad without some guidance. Harry shared a glance with Hermione. Dylan laughed. You mean there is something there you want to experiment on? Griffin glanced at Principal Valerian, whose lips were pursed together in disapproval, then solemnly shook his head. Of course not, Mr. Sawyer. My intentions are solely to keep you three kids safe and sound and educated. The teen beside him snorted, but kept any witty reply to himself. Griffin clapped his hands together in the gesture Harry had become accustomed to at the commune. Well then, let's be off. Bait. The principal stood, and with a glare lifted a crystal paperweight off her desk, speaking in a stern tone. This is a registered international portkey from the Bureau and approved by the Norwegian Ministry. It will take you directly to the entrance of Durmstrang Institute. I was told you would be met by their representative and proceed directly to your rooms, where a late dinner has been prepared. They would have already had their official dinner an hour ago. Griffin wrinkled his nose. Time differences. Yes, yes. Anything else? Principal Valerian narrowed her eyes again at the wizard. We expect all of you to be on your best behavior. You are representing the Academy, as well as all of North America. She met each of their eyes in turn, before settling on Griffin with a stern glance. Most of all you, Professor Griffin. I am giving these children into your care. That means you must leave the library at some point to make sure they are not getting into mischief. Griffin put up his hands in the universal gesture of innocence. I'd never. Now we all ready to go. He waited for nods all around, then gestured them closer before holding his hand out for the portkey. Principal Valerian laid it in his hands, then sat back down at her desk, a reluctant smile coming to her face. I expect the best from you three. Know that we here will be keeping track of your progress. Safe travels. Professor Griffin smiled brightly, then coached them all to lay their hands upon the crystal paperweight. Once they were settled, he looked back to the principal and smiled. Password. Valerian sighed in a very put-upon way. Fickle frogs frolic far away. Dylan laughed, and Griffin chuckled, then winked at Hermione with a conspiratorial grin as he whispered. Bet they're probably made some desk clerk late getting off work to get this portkey pushed through. Hermione's eyes widened, and behind them Principal Valerian sniffed. Away with you. I have to deal with all the paperwork you four are causing me. Griffin laughed, put his hand over theirs on the portkey, then with a light voice, effortlessly sang out the tongue-twisting password. Jim, Jim, I swear that looks just like one of those dragon species Emily is always going on about from that school book of hers. There was a rumble from the kitchen. Can't be, dear. Those wizards don't let people get pictures of magic things. They do that magic stuff to prevent it. The woman glanced at the screen doubtfully, then shrugged. Did you see that, Dad? A little girl exclaimed, bouncing. I love dragons. Is it really real? Can I have one? No, darling, the father said in resignation. It's not real. No freaking way. Jerry breathed once the picture flickered off the screen. He immediately whipped open his laptop and typed in the web address given by the reporter. He read the simple one-word caption at the top. Proof then, he began scrolling through the pictures, one after another, dozens, hundreds. His computer hummed. No way. Harry fought not only to keep his feet, but his lunch. He hated portkeys already for the way they left him feeling nauseous, but the effects of one that traveled halfway across the world were doubled, the twisting and spinning enough to make him sway. Hermione leaned into him with a groan, and Harry steadied her, looking around. Dylan was hunched over, breathing heavily, his hands on his knees. Griffin had his legs braced, one hand on his hip, the other holding the paperweight so tightly his knuckles looked white. With a growl, the man put the thing in his pocket, shaking his head. Hermione shivered against him, raising her head to glance around. She gasped at what she saw. Mountains towered around them, a long ridge of snow-capped peaks. Not a tree or bush in sight, only cold rock. They were on a circular platform suspended high above the air, connected by a narrow walkway to a large stone entranceway that was hewn into the closest mountain. Far below, a small winding sliver of water reflected starlight in the night, leading to a large open space that may be a lake under layers of ice and snow. The wind had a cold bite to it, reminding Harry of the thin air he had felt when flying high over the mountains in Scotland. But these mountains were entirely different. Their peaks were jagged, snow-covered, their faces in a frigid blanket, glowing white in the darkness. Hermione spoke, her voice filled with wonder. "It's so beautiful." Harry glanced at her and saw her face upturned, looking at the clear night sky stretched out around them. He followed her gaze and saw the stars speckled across the sky, so much brighter than could be found near the populated Muggle cities. They seemed even more vivid than could be seen at Hogwarts, hinting that this place was even farther away from civilization than the Scottish castle. Harry immediately decided he needed to take Hermione to some of the places he had been, show her the night sky from all the different places in the world. He liked seeing her face filled with amazed wonder. "It's freaking freezing." Dylan gasped out from beside them, then the teen stomped his feet with another shudder. "Where is that person who is supposed to meet us? Sure you got the right place. This platform isn't even lit by torch." Griffin crossed his arms, tucking them into the sleeves in his blue robe as he answered. "This is it. I've read of this platform. It's usually as far as outsiders get. The castle is up there." He gestured, and Harry looked back towards the nearest mountain. He could just see in the dark a castle-shaped building rising from the peak, 4 lower towers with a 5th spire that reached up from the mountain like the giant squid's tentacle would from the lake at Hogwarts. He wouldn't be able to see that much if it wasn't for Iron, the runes that augmented his vision. Dylan snorted. "I don't see nothing but snow and more snow. We can cast magic, yes." Griffin shrugged. "You're in Norway now. Or at least, I suppose we are, with the school under the Norwegian ministry's jurisdiction. That means, over 15 you are considered responsible enough to cast magic. Get punished like an adult, too." He ended with that warning, eyes sparkling. Dylan immediately withdrew his wand and cast a warming charm with a relieved sigh. Hermione tilted her head. "You have to be 17 in Britain. Is it that way in America?" Dylan grumbled as he put his wand back in its leather holster. "No. Got to be 18 or graduated from school, whichever comes first." Griffin clapped his hands to get their attention. Harry laid his hand on Hermione's shivering shoulder and silently cast a warming charm of his own over her, and she glanced at him with a grateful smile. "Thanks, Harry. No problem." Griffin pointed down the walkway. "I propose we follow the walkway. It's not too far ahead to the entrance. Hopefully someone will meet us there." They trudged across the stone, and Harry noticed that no snow or ice clung to its surface as it did the mountains around him. He looked closer and saw minuscule runes carved into the stone, a glimmering network of wards that ran along in a twisted pattern. Several looked like the sort that would give warning should anyone use the platform. If they hadn't been expected to arrive now, someone would know they were here now. Ahead, as if summoned, a stone door in the entranceway began to open, sending a golden beam of torchlight out to meet them. In the entrance, a man stood, dressed in a heavy brown robe, its collar and cuffs lined with black and grey fur. "Welcome to Durmstrang Institute of Magic." His voice echoed to them, only lightly accented, and Griffin took the lead as they walked toward him. "I am H. Jalmer Gildenpalm, the head of the Department of Magical Sports and Games, and in charge of designing the challenges for the Triwizard Tournament." They came to a stop in front of the man, and Harry observed him curiously. The hood on his robe was back, showing wavy blonde hair, and his skin was pale. The wizard's eyes, one bright blue, the other a dark green, were striking and solemn. Griffin held out a hand, smiling brightly, though the expression was not returned from the other man. "I'm Zachary Griffin. I followed your career as a duelist when I was in school. Nice to meet a former champion of Europe. You were quite something." Harry saw some surprise flicker over the man before it was well hidden. The wizard looked curiously at the outstretched hand, then took it gingerly, shaking it once before dropping it quickly, with a quick murmur of thanks at the praise. Griffin's smile did not fade, and Harry began to realize that as much as the Norwegian man used expressionlessness as a mask to hide emotions, Griffin used humor. Gildenpalm turned to them, his multicolored eyes running between them. "And these are the ones chosen to be champions." Griffin turned and gestured dramatically, introducing them one by one. "Mr. Dylan Sawyer, Miss Hermione Granger, and Mr. Harry Potter. The Academy is proud to have them represent us." Gildenpalm's gaze met his own, and Harry did not blink, meeting the striking eyes without reaction. Gildenpalm finally looked away, back towards Griffin, a welcoming smile carefully taking over his face. Very good. You are almost welcome. If you will follow me, I will explain some of the school's layout on the way to your designated quarters. The wizard turned and stepped inside, and Harry followed after a quick glance at Hermione, who looked nervous. She smiled at him and shook her head, a hand brushing his. Lead on. I'm fine. Harry nodded and continued. The large door closed behind them without prompting, and Harry was surprised that he noticed little temperature difference between the chill outside and that inside, despite the torches that lit the large room they were in. It was a large hallway, portraits and coats of armor lining the long expanse, a scarlet carpet running its length under their feet. Gildenpalm began to speak, explaining. Durmstrang is split into 50 grand levels, or Niver. We are currently on Niver 45, the entrance into our beloved school. From here can be reached our 5 towers, known by their numbers, 46 through 50. 47 is Headmaster Karkaroff's office and rooms. Hermione glanced at Harry with wide eyes. I thought the school was small. My books all say it is a simple castle on the top of a mountain. It must extend deep into the mountain itself. Before Harry could respond to the mental comment, Gildenpalm paused before 2 double wooden doors, and with a small push on their surface sent them open. Ahead of them, a large round hole opening in the floor, the right side the beginning of a grand spiral staircase that dropped below. Hermione and Harry walked up to the stone railing and glanced down. Beside them, Dylan gawked. How deep does this place go? The boy questioned, eyes wide. Harry couldn't help but agree. They seemed to stand at the top of a point. The stairs wound larger and larger as they dropped below, the bottom so far below they could barely make out the shapes of people using the stairs. In the middle, an occasional shape on a broom flew from one level to another. H. Jalmer Gildenpalm spoke, his voice conveying pride. Each level varies in size, but generally they grow larger as you travel down the mountain. This central staircase is the main means of going between Nivin. Our professors and staff are allowed the use of brooms, as are our Evni SJU, Ability 7 students, and the student leaders of each Evni as a privilege. There is a flu network as well, though its use is restricted to emergencies or special permission. Well, won't need to worry about exercise here. Dylan muttered under his breath, and Harry silently nodded. Hogwarts required frequent use of stairs to get from floor to floor or across the castle, but it was nothing like this. Hermione stepped back from the railing with a shudder, sending a glance towards Harry. He understood. His friend was not overly fond of heights and had never gotten comfortable using a broom. You may leave your things here. An elf will take them to your rooms. Hermione glanced at him, then carefully set down her trunk. Harry put his own beside hers, then looked over and waited. Gildenpalm began to stride towards the stairs, and they followed. The wizard continued to talk, his smooth voice echoing back to them. Durmstrang's 50 levels, called Niver by their guide, were organized based on use. The levels they were passing now were mostly teachers' offices and staff quarters. Each Niver had a stylized symbol representing it carved into the stone above the respective stairway entrance. The Nivin below the teachers' quarters, 20 through 30, were all classrooms, split up by subject. Gildenpalm paused as they passed Niver 20, not showing any sign of exertion. Both Hermione and Dylan were breathing heavily at the hike, and Griffin had one hand on the stone rail as he casually leaned against it. Harry assumed Gildenpalm was making a point even as he was showing off the vastness of the school. The wizard turned and fixed them with his blue and green eyes. Remember this, Niver 19. This is where the meals are served. There is a formal dining room used for special occasions and the evening dinner. You will be expected to sit with your school at a table set aside for you. Morning and afternoon meals are served in the 3 cafeteria rooms. There are no formalities. You may eat whenever and wherever you wish between the set serving times. Griffin nodded, and Gildenpalm turned and against began to stride down the stairs. Dylan groaned and turned to Harry with dramatic eyes. Can't he spend a little more time describing the decor or something? Stand still for 5 minutes. Harry only shrugged, and the teen sighed and turned to again begin descending the stairs. Hermione smiled. At least we're going down, not up. This would be a hike going the length of the school. Harry nodded. Ahead of them, H. Jalmer Gildenpalm began to speak again, gesturing occasionally. This Neva 18 is where you will go if you are injured during the tournament. Hellbred, our healing station, is to the right when you exit. To the left are our dueling arenas. Harry couldn't see anything but two long hallways splitting off from the stairs exit. He glanced over the railing to their left and saw that the floor level was much closer now. The students they had glimpsed before had vanished, and they had passed no one on their trip down, so perhaps there was a curfew around this time. Hermione pointed into the open air, and Harry saw across from them on the curved stone wall was a large portrait of a wizard holding a staff and wearing emerald robes. His white hair flowed down his back in a style like Dumbledore's. "Merlin," Hermione whispered. Harry nodded but frowned. "It's not moving." Hermione shrugged. "It looks old. Maybe it was never enchanted." Harry looked it over again, his frown deepening. The man looked ancient, and the staff in his hand bore a large green stone that glowed with an ethereal light. Flamel had told him Merlin's staff had been shattered, unable to bear the wizard's power at its zenith. Hermione nudged him, and he saw the others had moved on. The two quickly caught up, listening as Gildenpalm continued his instructions. "The tournament will be held on these levels. They are under construction." Harry saw that a long length of velvet rope ran across the open space where the stair opened onto the levels they passed. In his sight, the air above and below it shimmered with wards. Jalmer continued down. Soon, Hermione gasped, her eyes widening. Harry looked ahead and saw that the wall ahead opened up into multiple pillars. The stairs crossed the open space, and then dipping down again. What had Hermione's attention was what could be seen beyond the pillars, rows and rows of shelves filled with books from floor to ceiling. Gildenpalm paused and smiled. Nivin 11 through 13 house the Durmstrang Bibliothek, our library. There are stairs within that cross the Nivin as well, without using the main staircase. You may check any book you like out of the library with the use of the passes that are in your rooms. There are tables and reading areas within, if you wish to read inside the library. Griffin's smile had faded, replaced by an eager concentration as he looked over the library. Harry saw the same fervor there as he saw in Hermione, and realized that Principal Valerian's comment wasn't idle. He had a feeling that he knew where those two would be most of the time. Gildenpalm turned to continue down the stairs, Griffin reluctantly looking away to follow. Hermione brushed close to Harry, her voice excited. "This library is probably bigger than Hogwarts. Hard to tell without going inside. You think there is something like the restricted section? I cannot wait to see what they have. I hope there are plenty in English, or at least Latin. I've researched a translation charm, but it's slow, charming a quill to translate by writing on a page. I couldn't find anything better, and at the time didn't know I would be going to a foreign library. You think Griffin knows something better?" She finally rambled to an end, and Harry glanced ahead to where the Academy alumni was walking, his head craning around occasionally to spy the books behind them. Harry grinned. "I have a feeling he might. If anyone would know, it would be him." Hermione made a sound of excitement, her smile widening as she bounced. All traces of being tired from the walk had vanished. Dylan, however, wasn't so affected. He lumbered along the stairs, rolling his eyes at her exuberance. Jalmer Gildenpalm began to speak as they passed the library level, his tone firm. "These next two Niveen are our students' quarters. They are arranged based on their Evni. The older students earn larger rooms and greater luxury than the lesser Evnin. Your own quarters will be on Neva 7, below our students. Hogwarts and Beauxbaton's rooms are here as well, in their own suites." "Finally," Dylan murmured. Harry glanced to the side as they passed the entrances to the student quarters, hoping to get a glance of anyone. He only saw long corridors and stout wooden doors on each level, stretching down a corridor until it curved out of sight. Gildenpalm continued. "Below you, Neva 6, is Durmstrang's indoor Rumpeldunk Bane, Quidditch pitch in your country, the largest such indoor arena in the world." Again, his voice rang with pride. Dylan snorted softly as he mumbled. And yet no one ever knew that fact until now. Why they suddenly telling everyone all this? Harry wondered the same thing. Before he could answer the rhetorical question, Gildenpalm's voice carried back to them. "If you have need to brew any potions during your stay, below there are our potions laboratories on Neva 3. Gildenpalm stopped, and Harry glanced up to see a large letter 7, decorated in ivy, above the stair. Our guest, Niv A-ring. H. Jalmer said simply, then started down a long corridor that branched off from the staircase. The way was lit by torches inset into the walls, and between them were portraits of various landscapes. H. Jalmer stopped at the third door down the long hallway, a large wooden door with iron bars spiraling across it. The wizard touched the door, and it opened before him. H. Jalmer Gildenpalm did not step through the entrance, but stepped back to meet Griffin's eyes. Itinerary is inside, as is our meal schedule. If you need anything, there is a house elf assigned for your use. There is also a flue hooked to the main suite, though we ask that only yourself, Professor Griffin, use it, unless in emergencies. It would not look well on your students if they are seen breaking the rules our own must abide by. Griffin nodded easily and smiled again. Nice to meet you, Mr. Gildenpalm. We look forward to our stay in Durmstrang. It is magnificent. H. Jalmer Gildenpalm nodded once, dipping into a half-bow, then turned and walked back the way they had come. Griffin looked them over and grinned. Well, here we are. And with that, stepped inside their rooms with a jaunty skip. Harry glanced at Hermione, smiled, and followed. Mum! The teenager shrieked excitedly as she left the living room at a dead run for the kitchen. Mum, you won't believe it, Mum, that they just said some people are going around saying magic is real. Her mother, absently swirling a wooden spoon in a large pan, only waved her off. She was listening to her newest romantic audiobook on her stereo, and it was just getting to the best part. Get out of here, Sally. You know your father doesn't like you to hear my books. The girl rolled her eyes and walked out to the detailed description of a hunky man with dreamy eyes. Why did her mom have to be so embarrassing? Sally looked back at the television as the reporters covered the basics of the website that had become a viral sensation in the last 24 hours. She grinned and raced for her laptop upstairs. This would be much more interesting than homework. She wondered what her friends were thinking about it. The rooms set aside for the academy were laid out in a rough circular pattern and appeared to be cut from the very rock of the mountain itself. The main living room was large and furnished with chairs and a table, the far side of which had a wide fireplace that took up much of the wall. Where does the smoke go? Hermione questioned as she walked up to it. Griffin looked over, peeking his head around the corner of the room he had wandered into. Outside. Eventually, I suppose. I don't doubt they have some system set up to use the heat in the smoke. We are below the kitchens. Of course, they could just use some type of ward to do away with it. Hermione nodded, and Griffin smiled brightly as he stepped to the center of the room and clapped for all of their attention. There are 2 bedrooms off to either side there, a bathroom between each pair to be shared. Boys, pick whichever strikes your fancy. They appear to be all the same. There is a 5th fancier bedroom here with its own bathroom, I'm guessing meant for the leader of this esteemed party. Hermione, you take it, as you're the only female among us. That will give you your own bathroom. Hermione paused in surprise, then flushed and nodded gratefully. Harry walked over to the bedrooms and looked in. There was a bed within much larger than those offered at Hogwarts, and the room also had a desk, wardrobe, and a large chest that must be meant to store things in. Harry shrugged. I'll take this one. Dylan had wandered into the bedroom beside his, then out into his own room through the bathroom with a grin. This is awesome. You should see the size of that tub. It's like a muggle jacuzzi. Harry frowned. What? Dylan smiled devilishly. Think of it as a giant tub with jets of water streaming out to massage you, everywhere. The teen didn't wait for a response to that, but winked and turned, heading back to his room whistling some tune Harry didn't recognize. Harry shook his head and walked back into the main room. In the center, the elves had deposited all of their things. Harry gathered his trunk and pulled it into his room, not bothering to unpack it before glancing around, then calling out for Darby. In a second the elf appeared, its large green eyes taking in the room. Is this Master's room? Harry nodded. Yes, Hermione's is the larger one at the end. Darby nodded quickly, then grinned. Blossom is agreed to watch Mistress Hermione, sir. Harry inclined his head, then frowned. There is supposed to be an elf from Durmstrang assigned to these rooms for our use. Can you? Darby straightened, his bearing abruptly imperious. Darby will let this elf know that Darby will take care of Master and Mistress's needs. Harry thanked him, internally smiling at his attitude. He had found that house elves held great pride in their work and tended to get greatly upset if it was taken from them. He doubted Darby would have any trouble at all convincing the other elf when and where it was needed. Harry told Darby he could go and left his room, finding Hermione sitting on the large sofa, looking around the room with wide eyes. Harry sat beside her, and she smiled at him, leaning over to touch her fingers to the back of his hand, her thoughts echoing to him through the touch with no effort. My room is amazing. This place is amazing. It's hard not to be impressed. Harry nodded and smiled, answering out loud. I know. He turned his hand over and let it squeeze her fingers gently while brushing his mind against hers. Spoke to Darby. Blossom will take care of your things and room. He will also bring Crookshanks and Hedwig. Did H. Jelmer mention an owlery? I don't think Hedwig will like being underground. The thoughts went by rapidly, much faster than normal speech. Hermione followed them easily and answered warmly. Wonderful. He did not. Have you seen the itinerary? It may include a map of the school. As one, they turned, glancing over the large area around them. Dylan, leaning against the doorjamb of his room watching them, laughed. I feel like I'm deaf, and you two are talking to each other, and I just can't hear it. Hermione stiffened next to him, yanking her hand free and jumping to her feet. Don't be ridiculous. Have you seen the itinerary? Dylan raised an eyebrow at her abrasive tone, then shrugged loosely. Nope. Have you seen the food he mentioned? I'm still on States time, and that means supper. Hermione frowned at him, and Harry stood up as well, glancing around before shaking his head. No food. He walked further a bit and looked at the stack of books on the table. On top, a thin leather book was placed neatly, its edges gilded with metallic gold. He picked it up and opened the first page, rewarded with large, bold letters that was, happily, in English. Durmstrang Institute underneath was a large crest, a golden two-headed eagle with its large wings spread, directly underneath it a red skull of some sort of deer. Harry turned the page, then laid the book on the table, letting flaps unfold to show a large map of the school. Hermione stepped up beside him, her eyes wide. It's huge. Look at how far these levels stretch out. The bottom levels are nearly twice as wide as the ones up top. This place could house thousands of students. Dylan strolled over, looking over the map with raised eyebrows. Talk about overkill. I bet they don't use half of the room they have here. I bet it's even bigger than this shows, too. They wouldn't want other schools to know everything. Correct. Zach Griffin said from behind them, blue eyes bright. He looked over their shoulders at the map. I don't doubt most areas will be inaccessible to us. I don't encourage wandering off the beaten path, so to speak. Hermione leaned closer to the top of the map, looking at the 5 towers spiraling off the peak. She pointed one finger at one of the towers. This one, Owlery 46. We get to it from that hallway we entered in at the top of the staircase. Dylan huffed. Have fun hiking back up there to send letters. I think my parents can do with 1 a month or so with that sort of walk. If I'm lucky, we won't have to go higher than the cafeterias the man mentioned. Griffin looped a hand over the boy's shoulder and squeezed fondly. Oh, Mr. Sawyer, my favorite cousin, lazy just like me. You know it, the boy said, then shoved the older man away with a smile. Hermione shook her head, then looked over at Harry. You think the owls are allowed inside the building? They could fly right down the opening the staircase winds around. There has to be some way mail is taken to the students. Griffin hummed, looking over the map, then sighed. No idea. At the academy, the mail is sorted by the staff from a general box and sent via spells to their rooms. Hogwarts. Hermione looked over at the wizard, her brown hair bouncing with the movement. Owls take it to where they sit at their tables in the great hall, after meals. Dylan grinned. Awesome. Owl poop in my hair. Hermione frowned at him with disapproval. The owls are far too well-mannered to do such a thing. Harry laughed at the boy's face, a mixture of exasperation and humor. A sound behind them drew their attention. A house elf had appeared in the center of the room and was placing a large platter on the smaller end table. It straightened and bowed to them, then with a snap of its fingers disappeared. Dylan let out a yell and hopped over, looking over the food with avid eyes. Check this out. He demonstrated by beginning to scoop up food onto a delicate silver plate. Griffin glanced over at Hermione and Harry with a grin. Better get some while there's still some left. The Sawyer side of the family is known for eating us out of house and home. Dylan only grunted at the jab. Hermione sniffed, but walked over, and Harry trailed behind her with a smile. Dylan reminded him of Neville, if an older and more exuberant version. Zach Griffin acted similar to Sirius, perhaps the way the other wizard would have been had he not been sent to Azkaban. In fact, Harry thought as he began to fill his own plate, they were around the same age. It would be easy to make friends with the both of them. Harry could tell even Hermione had warmed to them as much as the other boy rubbed her the wrong way at times. But Harry had to remind himself that this was temporary. After the blasted tournament was over, Harry would either have to continue enrollment at the academy or continue with his plans for emancipation. As nice of a school as the academy looked, and though he liked what he had seen of its principal, Harry still preferred the other option. Hermione, on the other hand, Harry looked over at her as she talked over her plate, telling Griffin about her muggle parents and their jobs as dentists. Hermione would have to decide if she was willing to return to Hogwarts. If she decided to stay at the academy, she would be an ocean away from her parents. What would he do, Harry thought, if she did? He had some property in America. He remembered Griffook telling him so over a year ago. Harry didn't know where it was, though. The sound of his name drew him out of his thoughts. Harry, pass me the book. He looked up at Hermione, who he saw had finished eating while he was lost in thought. Harry set his own empty plate aside and walked over to the book, folding up the map before passing it over. Hermione thumbed through it, reading aloud important parts as she skimmed. Looks like there is an hour breakfast period at 7 and 2 hours between 11 and 1 for lunch. We need to set an alarm, I suppose, to start getting used to the time change. Not as much for Harry and I, an hour, but it's, 5 hours for you two? Griffin tilted his head, then spoke. 6, actually, whether we are in Norway or Sweden, it's the same. Hermione nodded, then looked down again. The challenge will be at the end of every month. First one is end of November. There is a clue here for the entire tournament. She frowned at it, mouth moving silently as she read. Then she shrugged. It's in Latin, written like a poem. She passed it over, scrambling in her things for a quill and paper, and Harry read the text. It's Latin written in wide calligraphy. Dextra tenet virga, in sanguine magia, intra mentis cor, veneficus. Hermione copied the text into her book, beginning to translate it. Harry, his own Latin well established from his studies, both for his runes and with spells in general, translated it himself aloud. The hand that holds the wand, within the blood magic, within the mind heart, a wizard. Hermione glanced up with a frown. That sounds right. I think Veneficus is more the wizard. The both looked over at Griffin, who raised his hands and smiled apologetically. I'm not supposed to help you technically. Now if I see the others helping their own brood, I'll step up. As it is, I'll say the form probably doesn't matter. Dylan looked over at Hermione's writing, nodded, then smiled. You catch it. 7 nouns. Hermione smiled back at the teen, her brown eyes bright. And 7 challenges. So each noun is a clue for what each challenge will contain. Harry sighed. So the clue for the first challenge is supposed to be Dextra, the hand. That's all we get. Hermione flipped a few pages, then bit her lip and looked over at him. I guess so. There isn't anything else. I'm assuming these blank pages at the back will fill in with the location we are to go to for each challenge once they are decided. And there's a blank score sheet after the judge listing and the listed rules. It will fill in as challenges are completed. Dylan leaned back and put his boots on the table, crossing them at the ankle as he sighed. How are we judged? Hermione turned to the correct page and summarized, her eyes darting across the page. There are 7 competitions and 4 teams. The judges will decide who gets first, second, third, and fourth place at each competition. First place gets 4 points, second gets 3, and so on. Whomever at the end of the tournament has the most points wins. Dylan frowned. Who are the judges? Hermione looked over the names, then tilted her head. It looks like they haven't updated it yet, or else this is really not going to be in our favor. The headmaster or headmistress of each school and a ministry rep from that school's countries. No one here is from the academy or America. All 3 of them looked at Griffin, who sighed. I'm sorry, kiddies, but that's the way it is. Bate, Principal Valerian, did all she could just to get me and Mr. Sawyer there to be able to come over here officially. Our bureau doesn't play well with Europe, hasn't since it was founded, directly against the Iqua's orders, mind you. It's why we don't call ourselves a ministry, like the rest of the world. They couldn't stop us from creating our own magical government, splitting off from the old ones, but they didn't have to approve of it. The bureau wouldn't agree to send an official representative, and Principal Valerian couldn't excuse herself from the academy for an entire year. Dylan scowled. Well, what about you then? Why can't you serve on this judge panel at least? Griffin lifted a shoulder in a half-hearted shrug. I'm neither the head of the academy, thank God, nor a representative of the Bureau. It was decided I wouldn't push myself into this. Technically, none of us are even supposed to be here. None of them looked at Hermione except for Harry, who saw that his friend was looking down at her lap, her face withdrawn. Dylan grumbled. Well, we know it won't be fair then. No way will they score us over their own people, and we have no one to vote for us. Harry spoke up at that, voice firm. We will just have to win so absolutely there won't be any question. Dylan rolled his eyes, but subsided. Hermione cleared her throat. Well, we've got a month to think about what Dexter could represent. Perhaps something we have to do with our hands, like potion making or, well, potion making actually seems the most likely scenario. Harry rested his chin on one hand as he leaned over the table, thinking. Dexter could also mean right or pledge. Hand fits best in the sentence, though, with the words tenet virga or holding staff. Virga, staff, probably being wand, well. There can always be more than one translation. Harry finished with a sigh. Dylan grumbled again, then stood. Well, I say we sleep on it. It feels like it has been a long day. I'm going to have to get used to not having any windows to look out of. Hermione sniffed. Well, there is another reason to walk up the stairs to the towers. Dylan only waved a hand at her and turned, leaving them to go to his room. Griffin also stood, giving them an apologetic smile. I guess I'll head in too. We can discuss any tutoring tomorrow. Honestly, I've never taught a single class in my life. I'm a scholar, got enough degrees to make myself feel important, so they like to call me professor and such, but it was never my calling. I hope you two know what it is you need to learn. Have a good night. With those encouraging words, the man turned and left. Hermione looked at Harry and groaned. I'm going to fail them. The OWLS we were supposed to start studying for them this year. Now I'm doomed. Harry laughed and patted her on the back. I've got the requirements for them. Was planning on taking them this December, you know that. We can study together. Hermione looked up at him and scowled. Harry Potter, there is no way I'm going to be ready for the OWLS this winter. Harry shrugged. You're top of your class, know a ton more than most your age. What about in the summer? You study all year, I bet you could do it. Hermione stared at him blankly now, and he saw the shock in her eyes. Oh, I guess it just hit me. She swayed slightly. I'm not a Hogwarts student anymore. I'm not, am I? So, no more Gryffindor, no more. What about my OWLS? What do I do? She sounded lost. Harry quickly slid over closer to her and she leaned against him. Harry was silent a moment, trying to think of what to say, until he finally spoke. I don't think they will turn you away, Myoni, if you go back next year. I think you could take your OWLS if you wanted, but it's up to you. Even if you did, if you went back to Hogwarts, they probably wouldn't make you skip the year if you didn't want to. I'm sorry. Harry finished lamely. Hermione chuckled weakly. I just haven't really thought about it. So much has happened with this tournament. I haven't really stopped to think about what happens after. There is the academy, I guess, but I hardly know anything about that school. Hogwarts was always so special. It was important to me. Harry didn't know what to say to that. Instead, he addressed the previous statement. Well, Dylan could probably tell you more than you ever wanted to know about the academy. Hermione nodded slightly, but stared blankly across the room into the flickering flames of the fireplace. Yes, I've got all year to decide. It makes sense, too, to follow the OWL material. That's what our peers will be doing, right? I'll just study along behind you. She didn't sound excited by the prospect. Harry put a hand around her shoulders and sat in silence, looking around the room as he thought. Finally, he spoke into her mind, letting his emotions color the words. I'm here with you, Myoni. I'll be wherever you go, too. She was his best friend. Harry had already begun to follow the same paths her own mind had just went down, and knew she would have to decide now, 3 years before she should have had to, just what she wanted out of life. It wouldn't be easy. Hermione sighed, and her mind spoke back to him, a mere whisper. Thanks, Harry. Behind the words he felt the emotion, and when he closed his eyes saw flashes of green and blue and purple, the unique rainbow of her mind. Dread coiled inside and hissed, his own voice soft. I am here as well, she who explains. Hermione chuckled weakly and turned to press her face into his side. Only in the magical world can I hear voices in my mind and not be mad. Hello, Mr. Dreadful. Didn't think I could hear you when you are not corporeal. Harry laughed as Dread hissed in pleasure. I hear you when you speak to the master in this way. I stay inside when he does not think others would approve of me. Hermione poked Harry with one hand, and he marked a hiss of pain. Hermione smiled as she answered the serpent. I'll have a talk with him about that. Must be boring, listening to Harry all the time. There should be a way to let you free. You look like a normal Quetzalcoatl. Perhaps we can pretend to order one. For Harry, tell others you came from Brazil. You would be an odd pet, but surely not as rare as a phoenix. Dread seemed to quiver in eagerness inside Harry's chest, like a spinning ball of energy. I would be a much better companion than a silly squeaker and much more catching of the eyes. Hermione's voice spoke softly in answer. Beautiful. The word is beautiful. Yes, Dread hissed back. Beautiful. That is what I am. I know this because I have heard the thought that I am interesting and hard to look away from. Like the bird that flames and the sunset over the mountains and you. Hermione stiffened against him, and Harry, who had been relaxed against the couch, straightened. Now, wait a minute here. Harry began, even as Hermione spoke at the same time. Me. Harry looked down at Hermione, who was looking up at him with startled brown eyes. Dread continued, his sibilant voice pleased in their ears. Yes, I will be your pet, master. Then I will be allowed to fly freely. I will never leave you. I cannot leave you, for you are me and I am you. But I wish freedom. I think my own thoughts. I dream. I desire the wind under my wings and the taste of delicious sausage and flesh under my fangs. Harry looked away from Hermione, the Quetzalcoatl's words distracting him from the previous comment. He hadn't realized the serpent felt so strongly. There had been hints, of course, especially over the last summer. But never before had the snake sounded so full of conviction and pleading. I'm sorry. I should have tried harder to find a way for you to exist outside of myself. I just want you to be safe. Hermione spoke aloud, and the sound of it in his ears startled him. He is a being of energy, from what I could tell this summer. He has the ability to transform both into steel and into pure magic, which is how he is able to merge with your own power. Can he actually be hurt or captured? You could probably summon him from nearly anywhere if you tried. Harry nodded and sighed. She had thought of it more than he had. In many ways, Harry just accepted what magic could do without considering how Hermione thought more about the how and why, and that greatly increased her ability to solve a problem. Harry spoke to the serpent again, his tone contrite. We will try this, Dread. It may take some time. I will need to see how to purchase a Quetzalcoatl, if it can even be done. People will want to know when I suddenly appear with one. Dread only coiled more tightly inside, his voice smug. I can wait. She who explains will not let you forget. The serpent fell silent, and Harry suddenly couldn't bring himself to look at she call him out on what the snake had said before. And what exactly had Dread meant? Did he really think of Hermione that way? Interesting, and hard to look away from, was what he had said. Well, of course Hermione was interesting. She was intelligent and smart and funny. She was kind to everyone and treated his house elves like real people. She was, in a word, brilliant. Well, I'm off to bed. Hermione spoke and jumped to her feet. Harry looked up, startled. Oh, all right. Me too, I guess. Hermione nodded once and turned and marched away towards her room without meeting his eyes, stopping to grasp her trunk. Harry watched her go, feeling out of sorts. She was hard to look away from, Harry realized. She seemed to light up a room when she entered. Harry had never really thought about it before, had always taken her presence for granted, that she would be there, solving problems at his side. He thought of all the ways her face looked when he watched her. Her nose wrinkled when she was faced with a problem. She sometimes chewed on the end of her feathered quills. Her brown eyes, how they lightened when she was excited, how they darkened when she was sad. How she occasionally twirled a strand of hair around her fingers when she was readying a book, or bit a thumbnail when deep in thought. She made him see clearer. She was like the pair of spectacles when he lost his eyesight, clarifying the world around him. How often had Harry caught himself looking at her, even if just for the simple pleasure of watching her read a book or write an essay. Dread had noticed before he himself had, and had named it, catching of the eyes. Beautiful. I think Hermione is beautiful. The truth of it finally hit him, and Harry remained sitting where he was, staring unseeing at the fire. What did he do with that revelation? How was he supposed to feel? He did think other things were beautiful, of course, though he didn't usually think of them in those terms. But never a person, not his best friend, not a girl. Harry gulped and abruptly felt out of his depth. He wished Sirius was here or Remus. They would know what to do. Did he even have to do anything? Surely they thought certain women were pretty, right? He would have to ask them, find a time to visit. Harry finally stood and walked to his room, going through the motions of getting ready for bed with his usual routine, lost in thought. Was he actually going to need to ask somebody about girls? Suddenly, the dangers of the tournament didn't seem quite so bad in comparison. Philip felt a small fission of terror squeeze his stomach as he stared at the large display of TVS from the sidewalk. It couldn't be. Surely not. How could the Muggles have gotten a picture of a Hebridean dragon? There were wards over the sanctuary. No Muggle should have been able to get close enough for a picture. Had a Muggle-born's family released pictures one of their children had taken? But how did it end up on the news? Surely no one would take it seriously. Philip nodded to himself and sighed. No, of course not. He might need to inform his boss at the ministry, but then again, why? It was the weekend, and his boss didn't like to be disturbed. The man would think Philip was crazy too, might reflect badly on his job. Plus, Muggles. It was simply impossible. Yes, it was impossible. He must have been mistaken. Philip continued to walk down the street, nodding to himself. No way the Muggles had actual pictures of anything, and even they did really, who would believe it? Nothing to worry about at all. Severus Snape sat in the high-backed blue chair, surrounded by the former headmasters of Hogwarts, and carefully controlled his expression. Across from him, Albus Dumbledore looked more broken than he had been the night they discovered the boy who lived was gone from his relative's house. "You are sure?" Severus questioned carefully, watching the older wizard for any sign. But the headmaster only looked up, blue eyes lacking their usual sparkle. "Yes, they are registered under the academy. I got word from the ministry by Owl. I cannot understand it. He could have come to Hogwarts if he wanted to compete with Miss Granger. I would not have turned him away if he insisted, but welcomed him. Instead, he chose a school he knows nothing about from a country at odds with Britain." Severus stiffened, incredulity rising in him. He spoke, his tone harsh. "You are surprised. You have not exactly done much to gain his trust." Dumbledore's face hardened. "I have kept secret the things I know he can do. I let him leave Hogwarts when it became obvious he no longer wanted to stay." Severus couldn't help it. The laughter bubbled forth, though no mirth was in it. "You made him leave that Muggle, obliviating him in the process, then took Harry forcibly to Hogwarts. Excused it all under a technicality, giving yourself the say in his life. You were never supposed to be able to tell him what he could and could not do. The boy was obvious in his resentment of that fact. You were the one who sent Flamel to him. I'm still surprised that scheme of yours worked. You tried to get the wolf to report the boy's movements to you. I wouldn't doubt the man told Potter of that fact. You were part of the movement to put Black in prison without a trial, thinking you knew all the facts. You shouldn't be asking why he doesn't trust you, but why he should." Dumbledore's face showed anger now, and Severus felt the air around him swirl, like a large storm beginning to brew. The old wizard's voice boomed when he spoke. "You were the one who gave me the impression that the Muggle was hated by Mr. Potter." Severus did not shrink back, but stood, facing the older wizard with a blank face. "It was one memory, one instant of emotion. That was all I could see before I lost my grip on his mind. You used it as the excuse you needed to get Harry within your power. Do not blame me for that. I know as well as you that you would have found a way, any way, to force Potter under your power. That even now you do not mourn the boy's trust, but your loss of control over him." Severus shouted the last into the maelstrom of magic surrounding the headmaster, surprised himself at the anger clogging his throat. It had been growing all along. Anger at himself for being an idiot, anger at Lily for going with Potter, anger at the Dark Lord for killing her, anger at Dumbledore for losing what little was left of her, and forcing him to teach at a school filled with idiot brats in recompense for his safety from the ministry. His easy prejudice against Severus's house, the excuses he made for the scum from others. He hated the headmaster in that moment as much as he hated the Dark Lord, two men who sought to control everything they touched. In many ways, the man in front of him was the worse of the two. He hid his true intentions under the veneer of kindness and love and the greater good. If Severus never heard that phrase again, he would die a happy wizard. The magic vanished, contained again as the headmaster stood himself, turning his back on the dark-haired wizard to face the rows of books that lined his office. The headmaster spoke again, his voice void of emotion, even as the words were a not-so-subtle slap. I have confided in you the reasons why Mr. Potter is so important to our world. His fate is irrevocably tied to that of Tom Riddle's. I will find a way to bring him around. If what I suspect is true, the prophecy was only the beginning. What Tom has done, what that diary is proof of, is a hideous crime and a great danger. I must continue with my research from Durmstrang. I am leaving you with a list of names, known descendants of the founders. Find them, find out what they know. Tom has a pattern. You know what to do if you find an artifact. Severus gave a short answer, resentment curling inside. Yes, headmaster. Dumbledore still did not turn when he spoke. Very well. I leave by portkey tonight to return to Durmstrang. You may contact me by owl or flue. Severus heard the dismissal. He turned, eyeing the empty perch in its central place of honor. The headmaster was taking a portkey instead of using his phoenix, and there was no evidence of a burning day. Severus left, his stride long and purposeful, his anger unabated though he controlled it with rigid Slytherin calm. He had said too much, at the last, to the headmaster. He must not let the wizard think he is unloyal, not let him suspect Severus's own changing convictions. He would have to fix any damage he had done with his rash words, and soon. A spy is only useful as long as he is trusted by both sides. Cornelius Fudge didn't yell. He didn't pace. He didn't wave his hands and gesture wildly. His anger was so great his knees refused to hold him, and his limbs trembled with it. So he sat behind his desk and watched his undersecretary, the large woman sitting with perfect posture in his guest chair, her small hands folded prettily in her lap. Pink covered her head to toe, in all the pastel shades the color was capable of. Dolores spoke, her voice gentle and conciliatory. The American ambassador was quite firm in his letter. A British witch was registered in a binding contract in a tournament spearheaded by the ministry. They decided, after much discussion, to allow their foremost school to support the child. They, and I quote, would not leave a child to face such a barbaric test of magic alone. They send no representative to the tournament other than a guardian, one Professor Zachary Griffin. His name is well known in scholarly circles as an up-and-coming genius, and it is rumored he may be America's next mage in a decade or so. I, for one, see it as positive that the tournament is no longer being held on our own shores. This is Norway's problem now. Fudge stammered, thumping his desk once. Nothing had changed in the last 3 centuries. His grandfather had told him of the brashness of the wizards who had emigrated to the New World. Several of them had even broken the statute, killing British muggles in that frivolous turf war. His grandfather had favored immediate action against them, but the ministry of the time had decided against it. Muggle lives were not important enough to start a war between wizards that could last for decades. They had their pride, which was obviously more than the Americans. The nerve of them! They deign, to participate in what is recognized as the greatest magical tournament of our kind. How dare they treat this ministry as if we are inferior to their own? We are one of the greatest wizarding governments of this age, not some mongrel bureau made up of muggle lovers and traitors. Dolores reached across and laid a gentle hand on his fist, looking into his eyes. Cornelius, you must not take this slight to heart. We are the better witches and wizards. We will not react to their petty insults. We will show the world who is more mature in this conflict. As it is, what is more important is the fact that Mr. Potter has unfortunately followed Miss Granger and enrolled at the academy to compete at her side. Fudge grumbled, some of the color that had been fading in his face rising again. If I ever find who entered that silly chit in the goblet, I will spare no expense having them arrested. Crouch assures me there was no way for her to enter herself with the safeguards they had in place. This is some scheme of Dumbledore's, no doubt, though it backfired in his face quite nicely. That is some consolation. Dolores nodded, sitting back upright in her chair and taking a small sip of tea. Yes, and it only set back our own plans by a few months at most. I've been assured that both Miss Granger's and Mr. Potter's enrollment in the academy is on a trial basis and can be terminated at the end of their school year. Fudge inclined his head once firmly, in sudden decision. Good. I propose we extend our hand to help the two after this unfortunate circumstance is over. Let them both know the Ministry of Magic holds no ill will regarding their cooperation with foreign governments. Perhaps this Miss Granger would be interested in joining Mr. Potter with ministry tutorship. I've heard she is a smart witch, even with her muggle-born ancestry. Dolores smiled brightly. I will set it up, Minister. Mike stared at the webpage's wildly increasing viewer count and cursed at himself. He had waited too long to get the information to Harry, and they had never thought of a way for him to send simple messages, instead of actually using his necklace to travel back to Hallamsant himself. He should have left earlier, should have told Harry about what he had found out about the Hound's use of the internet. But he kept thinking there was more. And there was. A lot more, an infinite amount of more. The Hounds had a vast database of information he was sure Harry hadn't known they had. Only the day before, Mike had managed to find that they were experimenting with a new compound that would be able to neutralize magic itself. But he hadn't known they had had pictures. No one had. The entire office had exploded in applause and excitement when it was announced, each of them scrambling to see the digital copies themselves. Mike had to find a way to get a copy of their information. Or at least find out what that compound was. What he knew was useless to Harry at the moment. What had happened with the photos was already done. But if Mike stayed, just a little bit longer, perhaps he could bring something much more concrete from this adventure. Proof that the Hounds were not as trustworthy as Harry seemed to think. Proof that they did not intend to have peaceful negotiations with magical kind. Or at the very least, the London branch did not. Maybe Mike could find out more about where the other Hounds were located. The secrets were kept close to the chest. It was entirely likely only James and that toady Nathan knew. But if they were ever to know their motives, their plans, if they were ever going to have a way to bring them down, they would first have to know who the hell they were. And it was far past time to bring Rick into the scheme. The young man had been friendly to Mike, but the rough edge hadn't worn off in the last months Mike had been there. Edges of distrust, anger, and simmering frustration. Mike simply wasn't as skilled with computers as he would need to be for this to work, and he knew Rick was. The man's attitude told Mike he wouldn't be betrayed. Rick seemed to hate the others, hated their reverence and excitement about magic. Hated magic as well, if Mike had to guess. But he hated the Hounds more. They shared that in common, at least. The both of them hated James and all he stood for. Perhaps, together, they could bring the man down. He is there. There was mad cackling from the silver-masked man in front of him. Jalmer Gildenpalm allowed himself a sneer behind his own mask, the unusual break in his expression safely hidden. Wonderful, just as our master predicted. Rosier seemed to chuckle, not exclaim, his sentence resulting in a nauseating garble of words and laughter. Why had the Dark Lord chosen this madman to be his trusted servant? And of course, Jalmer himself had been given the task to bring the boy wizard into public view. He hadn't been told how. The means had been his own, and its success or failure would be on his shoulders. But he had no time to waste in a pissing contest with the fool before him. If that is all, I must return. Don't hurry off. Eyes gleamed behind the silver face, the skull-shaped mask having deep holes cut around the eyes. Our master wishes to speak with you. Jalmer tipped his head, but made no comment. Rosier laughed again, whirling in a swirl of black robes to pace off down the grassy slope. They had stood on a small hill, the countryside around them dotted with trees and ancient stone fences, the occasional tangle of brush peeking through a low fog. It was earlier in the day than Durmstrang, wherever they were now. Jalmer had only visited Great Britain a few times, always on a tight schedule with no time to play the tourist. But he knew enough to make a good guess at where they could be in the country. This was the first time he had been told to meet here. The Dark Lord had given him a portkey for this very purpose, so Jalmer could reach his master without having to be directly summoned. Jalmer eyed the back of Rosier's neck as he followed, idly contemplating on killing the man. He couldn't do it now, of course. It would be far too obvious who was the perpetrator. But the man was unstable in more than one way. And he was far too annoying to strangers he did not know. You're a quiet one. You know, you don't have to hide behind that mask with me. We're all friendly here. Jalmer made no comment until the other man stopped and fixed him with a challenging stare. The humor bled from his face like oil from water. Jalmer responded in a frigid tone. You are wearing your own. Rosier threw his head back and laughed, gesturing with a long hand. I merely like its effect. Quite comfortable, really. And of course, you know who I am. I am not hiding. Jalmer sneered again towards the man in disdain. You know who I am as well. Rosier's eyes narrowed into slits, looking into his own. Then the man turned again, only a low thrum of angry chuckles echoing back. They approached a dilapidated building, an old muggle manor in bad need of repair. A fresh glimmer of wards hung over the place, bearing his master's distinctive touch. Jalmer shuddered as he walked through them, feeling as if a oily hand had run across his skin as he was allowed access. They passed a shed, approaching the wide concrete entry steps. Through the mist, Jalmer glimpsed a graveyard on another nearby hill. Then they were going inside, passing through dusty rooms that smelled of mold and rot. The change happened instantly. One moment everything was damaged, wood splintered in a long-ago act of vandalism. Then they turned a corner, and lavish wealth took its place. It was clean here, newly painted and repaired. The Dark Lord or some servant had been busy beginning to fix up the place. Rosier stopped and gestured to the door. Jalmer didn't pause to speak again to the man, but entered on silent feet. When he saw ahead a dark-robed figure, he knelt on one knee, bowing his head in subservience. Voldemort laughed, the tone superior and far different from that of his insane servant. Jalmer saw him make a gesture, and behind him the wooden door slammed shut. Take off your mask, Black Stone, and look at me. Do you approve? Jalmer didn't straighten from where he knelt on the floor, but dismissed his golden mask with a touch of one hand to his pocket. He slowly raised his gaze, and looked upon his master's new body for the first time. The Dark Lord did not look as he had in times past, but the similarities were obvious enough. He was taller, his form lean and yet tough under the black robes he wore. His fingers were long and skeletal, and his skin pale and bearing an odd gleam, as if its smooth surface was coated in a light layer of translucent scales. His hair was black now, colorless, as if all the color had been sucked from it and replaced with only darkness, and his eyes gleamed with a scarlet light in their inky depths. Prachtful, my lord, Jalmer murmured, and dropped his gaze again. Voldemort took a chair, and did not ask for him to rise. Instead, he crossed one leg idly over the other, tapping a long finger on the armrest. Progress on your task. It wasn't a question. Progress was expected, and punishment would soon follow if anything less was given. Jalmer allowed himself to show a smile. Harry Potter is currently at Durmstrang. The extraction can take place at any time. His master's red eyes seemed to glow with inner light as he let out a pleased smile of his own, and Jalmer saw that his teeth were no longer blunt or human, but some vicious equivalent. He looked away. The Dark Lord spoke. I doubted your plan at first, targeting the mudblood, but you have done well. I must prepare myself for our guest. I'm afraid we are currently in no state to entertain our savior. I will contact you in a month's time with details. His tone was dismissive. Jalmer remained where he was, head bowed again now, his black glamoured eyes trained on the luxurious carpet beneath him. The Academy's representative may present a risk. After the boy is dealt with, it may be wise to remove him as well. There was motion, but he did no look up to see. May, how so? The tone was deceptively light. Zachary Griffin possessed great power, though it is far below yourself, my lord. From his reputation, I suspect he will return to North America and not get involved in British infighting once the Academy is no longer implicated in the tournament. But if he does not, he could present a threat if he joined forces against us. Another movement, restless and displeased. Then his master made a low thrum of sound. Once the boy is taken care of, I will deal with him myself. Quietly, if possible. We do not want to involve any non-European countries until the British ministry is ours. Jalmer made no comment. Voldemort spoke again, his voice oddly sibilant suddenly, as if a serpent spoke with him. Look at me, Jalmer. He raised his head immediately, and again met those gleaming eyes, their scarlet depth seeming to take hold of him. He knew what his master wanted, and had done this many times before, many upon many. He opened up his mind without a struggle and let the Dark Lord inside, let him pass beyond his own rigid occlumency shields, seeing the memories of the Academy contestants and their powerful representative. He watched them again, the memories occasionally stopping and restarting, feeling as if he was held in a vice, gently and yet with easy strength, and the knowledge that there was no escape. He was a hare in a cage, awaiting the hunter's pleasure. The Dark Lord's strength was unmeasurable, and inside his mind impossible to hide. The force of it bent him down under its weight, but he did not struggle. Instead, he embraced it, allowing it to flood through his entire self, hiding nothing, giving everything. What had he to fear? His master was a powerful wizard, capable of great destruction. Any punishment he doled out would be rightful, and H. Jalmer would accept it without complaint. He was Svart, the assassin, the Black Stone, the Death Eater, the obedient servant, and this was his guard. Suddenly, the Dark Lord was pulling away, leaving behind an ache as the overwhelming power trickled from his mind, its touch running across his emotions and thoughts, skimming over recent memories. H. Jalmer shuddered involuntarily as he came back to himself, kneeling on the floor, dropping a head that suddenly felt leaden. Hands, thin and inhumanly strong, grasped his shoulders and pulled him up until he was standing. His master spoke again, and the odd echo was gone from his voice. "You've done well. Your loyalty is without fault. Leave." The hands released him, and H. Jalmer turned obediently. Before he could reach for the door, it opened, and he passed from the room, feeling as if he had just flown a broom through a storm and was coming out into the clear sky. His heart raced with exhilaration, even as his body wilted with exhaustion. Rosier had disappeared to his delight, and as soon as he was past the wards, H. Jalmer let the portkey spin him around and away. Rosier lay back in the grass, contemplating his newest mission as he squinted up at the brightening morning sky. He loved when the sunrise was so vibrant. The rare sky splashed in flesh-colored clouds, red blood and pink muscle and peach-colored flesh. Like a woman it was, being torn open by the sun's desire. Rosier sighed with longing, but he had to focus. There was no time for idle games, and he would have his feel of flesh again soon. It seemed there was another servant in hiding, one his master also wished to be found, and soon. Rosier had only contacted a dozen others for the Dark Lord, each given specific tasks. But this was different. This was no skulking, disloyal wizard or terrified coward. This one had remained loyal, was a captive, and Rosier had been told to make the jailer pay in blood. Of course, he would have to wait a few weeks to make his move. It was not easy, breaking into the house of a wizard so high up in the ministry. There would be wards to be dealt with, countermeasures and backup plans. He supposed he would take 2 others with him, though he would insist that it was his own right to draw first blood. No reason to go fast either. He would make it so they had all the time in the world, hours upon hours, to prove the folly of attempting to cage one of their own. A first bloody statement to the deaf and blind masses of wizardry that the darkness was upon them once more. Dreamily, Rosier could see it in his mind, how he would arrange the wizard's body once he was done for the most effect. If only he could be there when the auras arrived, could see their faces, hear their retches like sweet, sweet music. Unfortunately, there was a good chance Barty would want to do the deed himself. If so, Rosier hoped the man would make it last. Watching was nearly as sweet as doing. Nearly. James grinned, eyes gleaming in the dark office as he glanced over the web page again, the views ticker at the bottom displaying hits now in the million range. That very morning, it had measured only a sparse 10,000. It was all so brilliant. Everything finally coming together, building to a crescendo. Like the finest ballad, soft at first, slowly building note upon note until there was a riotous avalanche. A pinnacle, a culmination, his life's work, what he had made his entire life. Soon the world would know, they would believe, and then they would act. Brilliant. To be continued. The breaking power of love ~~ review please.